All right. Okay, good morning to the Halloween episode of the Vermont Climate Council's Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee. It's October 29th, 2021. And let's see. Today's meeting is going to focus primarily on the draft sections of the climate action plan that the subcommittee has been pulling together in advance of our deadline to provide those to the full council next Tuesday. And that's really where we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting. We'll do a little bit of administrative stuff first off. We'll go over the introductory sections and first few pathways of drafting. We'll take a first break for public comment. We'll go through the remainder of the pathways, hear some more public comment, and then talk about next steps to move things forward. So with that, is the council willing to approve both that agenda? Judy, please.
I have a question about the agenda. Last week, we were told to work on the biomass issue and present this week. Is that on the agenda or am I missing it?
I think that, Billy, that would go under, Judy, would go under pathway C. So when we get to that, I think we should talk about biomass. And I know David has an additional idea for energy development as well that he will want to cover under land use, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, thanks, Judy, for flagging that. Definitely, we want to come back to the biomass topic, but I think, whatever topical issues still need substantive discussion, we can bring up in their respective pathway.
Thank you.
So Jane.
Is that language that's circulating about biomass? I haven't posted that with today's documents. Is that something that we'd like to post or we'll share on screen when we get to it? How would you like me to handle that?
Judy and Charlie, I think we'll share on screen. I don't think we're quite ready to post, but we're ready to discuss.
Great, thanks.
Okay, with those clarifications, folks willing to approve today's agenda and the minutes from last week? Okay, thumbs up, blank stares, good. I'm going to abstain from the minutes. I was not present last week, so I suspect Lauren would do the same. Great. All right, so we are good with that. And I guess I'll just pass it over to either Pat or Jane. I don't know, Jane, if you want to kind of give us some framing comments or if we should just dive right in.
Sure. Why don't I give a little bit of comments on context and where we're trying to get to? Because that yesterday we did this with cross-sector and should have done that first, perhaps. So amazing effort to get to where we are today. There are the disparate pieces posted that will likely all be pulled together into the two sections really for the bulk of the work where Ag and Eco is going. So the section that is related to resilience in the natural landscape, and then the section related to building sequestration and storage. Those two sections, everything is separate right now, but over the work of today and then over the course of the next few days, we'll want to be thinking about revising the individual sections and then pulling it all together for comprehensive drafts to post on Tuesday. There's also the work that Ryan and Justin have really led around drafting of the agriculture mitigation section. That is actually up above the other two sections being packaged up with the emissions reduction section, but we held off on sharing that with the council with all the other work of cross-sector for this coming week to actually have it go forward with the work from Ag and Eco. So that will carry forward. And I will just say Ryan and I had a good call about that this week and are also thinking about how we do a better job of tying that work into the framing and context section for the emissions reductions section, so that it's not just sort of an ad hoc piece pulled into the cap up in that section. So today it's really to go through your drafts, have any questions around, I would encourage you to focus on how the different issues have been framed up, and then we can work through an appropriate timeline over the course of the next few days on how you'll make word edits, like grammatical, contextual edits, and then how you'd like me or Marion or other subcommittee members to support pulling it all together and giving it one voice. That's a question in my mind too. So we will want to work sort of backwards from posting Tuesday afternoon on how we'll meet that deadline and how the different pieces come together. So I would really encourage you to focus really on the high level issues that are being put forward and really think through at the end of today the timeline needed to get to sort of making the grammatical and contextual changes in the Word docs, and not focus on that today at this meeting. Hopefully that's helpful. And I should say that the way that we're proceeding with cross sectors work for Tuesday is different than the way we put forward work from subcommittees in the past. There's been a lot of presentations of work and not enough time for the council to dive into substantive conversation. So we're trying to revamp how these meetings work and the work ahead of that. So cross sectors work will all be posted today. And when it is posted around midday today, I'll be sending out a survey to council members that highlight the comprehensive action list in the survey, and ask councilors to name where they want to dive in and where they're having questions or concerns, so that the presentation from cross sector is only going to be 20 to 30 minutes. And then we're going to focus really in on having a conversation deep dive into where there's outstanding issues, questions, more information needed in order to bring counselors to support the ideas being brought forward. I imagine we will consider doing the same thing for rural resilience and ag and eco in order to have condensed presentations and put the onus on counselors to read the materials and then really dive into some substantive questions where consensus might not be easily reached. So we'll start to think about how that looks too as your work comes together.
Can I just ask a contextual question before we go forward to Jan? So do you envision that this is kind of the last substantive touch that this subcommittee has, or between now and Tuesday, the last touch we have on this content? Or do you anticipate that it will get kind of returned to us with comments from the council to work on, or any sense of that?
Yep, so the documents go up on Tuesday and they'll be in what we would hope from your vantage point would be near final. And then the council will discuss the following Tuesday. So they'll be out there. I don't think there'll be work done on them over the course of that week because the council will be reviewing them. They'll be discussed the following Tuesday, the 9th at the meeting, and then you'll have a week to address the concerns or questions raised by counselors for revised drafts to be posted on the 16th.
So the next deadline is November 16th, is that correct? After the
Yep.
second? Okay. So
So
let's,
we'll work, our effort has been one day turnaround of concise notes from the council meeting. So you'll get notes on the 10th and you'll be at the meeting. So you'll hear comments and issues that get brought up by the council. And then you'll get those comments directed to the task leads or whoever's in charge of which component of the work. And then we'll have a week to post a track change version and then a clean version on the 16th.
so let's just be, I think we want to be clear up front before before we dive in. So first of all, just give me the time on November 2nd. They have to be posted by what time, Jane?
On the 9th, is that what
on
you're second?
On the 2nd, yeah.
End of day on the 2nd would be the goal.
Okay. So a question, subcommittee here, co-chairs. So one possibility is we have the discussion we can have. This is a ton of material the way through. People did great and tremendous work in a short time. I know some issues are still outstanding and need further work even beyond the 2nd. Do we want to have the comment we have and take the author of that section, do their best to incorporate comments by such and such time? And then obviously we just need someone to fold this all into kind of essentially a single document, I believe. But I want to kind of see how we handle comments we get today, how we want to, who's going to kind of managing them. And co-chairs, I don't know if you have thoughts about how to best to do that.
I don't. I think at this point, I would suggest authors retain kind of control over their sections. And if there's comments, those folks make those changes. But I'm certainly open to other thoughts and suggestions. You know, I don't know how Jane spoke to kind of pulling everything together in one voice and consistency. I don't know how that necessarily will happen. But I think as far as the changes we surfaced today, individual authors should probably just control those.
All right, is that okay to folks? All right. And I guess one other question, just to be clear, and Marley put a note about how staff can help, so we'll come back to that because we'll probably need help, is are we giving people a chance over the weekend to do any kind of closer reading in addition to today to give final comments to the authors, say, you know, I don't know, Sunday night, Monday morning, or is this kind of it today?
Well, I don't know that it's a reasonable
I really want
expectation.
Charlie to comment because I feel like Charlie is really animated right now.
My only comment is that I feel like we're working under a timeline that is just ridiculous. I mean, like, I think we're all doing really good work, and I love all of us for it, but I feel like we're seeing deadlines and we're just doing it. I mean, I honestly have not had a chance to read any of the material that was posted last night because we were digging into other stuff, and then just assuming that we're going to have time over the weekends to work on revisions for, I mean, I don't know. I look at this and it's like, I'm ready to go back to the council and say, let's push the deadline out a month or two, do better work and get it right, as opposed to just trying to cram things in and say, don't worry, we'll fix it later. I mean, I even had a meeting with legislators this week and I brought it up and they were like, well, we get it. It won't be perfect or final, but you know, anyway, so I applaud all of our work. I love everybody here, but I do have this little bit of a feeling that we're literally just scrambling to meet deadlines and setting expectations for ourselves that are a little bit crazy, especially since most of us have at least one other full-time job, if not multiple jobs, plus other obligations. So anyway, just feeling a little bit, spinny maybe. So anyway.
Yeah,
that was cathartic. Thank you, Jane.
Yes, I feel this is a constant theme right now, right? And I think I really have no control over this, so I appreciate if I feel like I'm just the bearer of a legislative timeline that nobody has wanted to move until now it's up in our face. But I should say the council made the choice not to act on as a whole council to try to move. And so I don't know what to say other than that we are barreling towards December 1st, and that date has not moved, and I don't think it's going to move at this point. I will say that your work is being represented differently in response to the challenges of drafting. We didn't share the CAP drafting process because I didn't want to overwhelm you, but obviously there was a significant change to how Agnico and Rural Resilience are putting their work forward for the CAP that was adopted at the council this week in response to the recognition that the work for these two subcommittees isn't quite as fleshed out and ready as the other, as cross-sector. And so the way that the work is being represented is not in those action tables, it's a bulleted list of actions, and then speaking to the foundational criteria and next steps for the work at the strategy level. I hope that this makes it a bit simpler, but I completely appreciate the timeline, and I welcome Lauren has her hand up, counselors, to speak to what to do at this point, but I really just want to appreciate that I don't think the timeline is changing.
Lauren, over to you, one of the council members.
Well, I just want to appreciate what Charlie said and share, I think, in our collective frustration, and also that there's really no one person or entity to really blame here. And yet that frustration is pretty palpable. When I joined, before everyone joined, Pat welcomed me and Marion back, since we both were gone for a couple of weeks, not even a couple of weeks. And I jokingly said, I was gone for less than 2 business weeks and missed all of the writing. And it was only kind of joking. It's actually rather upsetting that I've been in this process for almost 13 months and like happened to take my first vacation since pre-COVID and missed all of the writing of the subcommittee despite all of the work. And knowing that it was posted yesterday and that it should be final by Tuesday is like genuinely wild, to Charlie's point. Anyway, a larger question that I have, Jane or Marion, maybe you can answer this, is a long time ago when we talked about this being an initial plan for December 1 and there being a more final version in March-ish, like what are we expecting to happen then? Because to Charlie's point, this is going to be like a pretty thrown together last minute plan. Like what can we do in those next 3 or 4 months as a subcommittee to really refine our work to better represent what we've been doing over the course of the year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that we're still viewing it as an initial plan, and even in the most recent testimony that just transitions, and I gave to House Energy and Technology last Friday, it was refreshing, I felt, to hear the back and forth from the legislators, even them perceiving and understanding the fact that this is initial and that it's going to be very iterative, both from the need to do better public engagement as well as to continue to refine the recommendations and actions that are being brought forward. I very much think that the conversation about public engagement last week with the council really highlighted a number of challenges also, and the challenge of what authentic engagement is going to look like over this winter, recognizing that the legislature is going to take a ton of work from the climate action plan and start running with it. It's already starting to happen. I think the council itself needs to really talk about what happens between December 1st and March 1st. I very much think that the plan is iterative and very much think that we are going to need to be revising it. Like there's going to be work though that is moving in a legislative process and requiring a lot of time and attention also. And I'm struggling with understanding, just from where I sit, how we're updating a plan while a whole chunk of it is moving through the legislative body. And so I have come to hear from people that there's almost going to need to be somewhat of a pause over the winter while the legislature is working, and then the council is going to have to pick it back up after and see what is still needing to work on. And I don't mean to say like a pause in the council, because there are going to be so many actions. There's also going to be a path for the council to continue immediate work on. At the steering committee meeting this afternoon, we're going to talk a lot about funding and what funding looks like for the December 1st plan versus what we're going to have to get to immediately after. And so I feel like I'm under all the same pressures that you guys are under right now at the timeline, and we're trying to like understand what happens after December 1st while building December 1st. I don't really have a lot of extreme clarity to provide on that, just appreciating that it's in flux constantly.
Let me go to Abby and Judy.
I have nothing really constructive to offer, just saying that every time people say what comes after December 1st, my entire body shuts down and I want to like crawl into a hole and never come out again, because my business cannot sustain my level of involvement anymore, any beyond December 1st. So there's also like, the reality is that there's also going, I think, need to be some re-examining of like how we're going to accomplish what needs to be accomplished after December 1st without, I'll say it again, a mass resignation or like of, people just, I don't think that this pace or this expectation level is tenable for most folks. I think we're all aware of that. So just wanting to name that, and that needs to be factored too into how I don't know whether that's like, that needs to come from the council to the legislature, or I don't know the mechanisms that need to be pulled to build out that reality. But I do think at some point, like the literal limits of the capacity of the council and the subcommittees needs to have a really fine point put on it to the legislative body, which I know they're part-time. I know that I get it, but I don't think that this is tenable for folks much longer. I could be speculating.
I
It certainly
don't-
isn't for me.
I doubt you're speculating, Abby. Judy, over to you.
I agree that probably most people have had enough and can't move forward. But I really want to, in light of what Jane just said, I really want to make this weekend a final push to get everything that we want in there. Because if legislation is going to take a pause over the winter and start working on, or we're going to take a pause and the legislation is going to start working on everything we submit, I think we should try to get everything we want to submit in there before Tuesday.
So I think, Charlie, thank you for expressing what I think everyone is feeling, with probably the exact words being pretty accurate of people's feelings about where we're at and how difficult this is. I think my thought is let's go through the sections, turning to the authors to say, what do you want us most to talk about? Or what's, to Judy's point, what's most missing we need to think about adding in the short time that we have? And we'll do our best. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Pat. I'll chime in after you complete.
Oh, no problem. And then I think we'll do our best to incorporate changes, figure out how to kind of weave this together into one. It will be imperfect. We have a little bit more time after the second, to continue to do work, frankly, of our own, as well as whatever the council comes back at you. And one thing I do want to really acknowledge in the middle of the frustration and the difficulty here is you all have done amazing work, like the depth of work, the analysis, the effort you put in the last few weeks. I mean, this whole months, but these last few weeks in writing is really impressive. So it feels completely unsatisfying, but really great work has been done. And I don't want you to diminish the great stuff that you've done. Billy, over to you.
So thanks for that. I just wanted to kind of clarify one question that was raised, which is, I know that not everyone's had the opportunity to read everything thoroughly. I know I haven't, and just wondering if there is going to be an opportunity for members to kind of read everything and share any additional comments prior to Tuesday, or if we're just going to try to do that all today and be done with it.
Billy, I have a suggestion. Jane, I have a suggestion, Jane, and then you can weigh in here because it may not fit the. My take is, especially given Charlie's point and the like, my sense that we do our best today. We get the document, we add everything that we can, as Judy noted. We get the thing we woven together into the council, and at the same time that's then available to the council. It's also available to all of you to review in total. And then next Friday, we can go through some additional, more detailed commentary while we're also waiting for comment from the council. And we may have to kind of integrate both final comment from the council and from you all at the same time. It's not ideal, but I also am cognizant of Charlie's point about, people do have lives they're trying to live too. So Jane, over to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is I think there's two questions. I think that there's a question around how we're going to pull it all together for the comprehensive draft to be posted on Tuesday. So that's a question in my mind of how you'd like to handle that. If you'd like myself or Marion to pull them all together and give them that once overview, and or if somebody else on the subcommittee wants to do that. I want to put it out there that we are happy to do that. I am happy to be the one to do that. But I also know that the subcommittee has been very interested in holding on to its work. So there's like a balance there. So I think that person, whoever is going to pull the drafts together, needs to have a deadline in mind on when they need everything, right? And then working towards that, there's still the revisions to the individual sections, and then the deadline of when those people need it. So I'm hearing that the weekend is challenging to most of us to actually read them all. I would ask that if the individual drafters were to get revisions by Monday at noon, that's one opportunity to give folks Monday morning. I know it's still not ideal, but give people till Monday at noon, and then know that folks who have to turn around revisions had till Monday night, close of night on Monday. And then whoever is in charge of pulling the comprehensive draft together had Tuesday during the day to do that before they were posted at night.
Okay,
so that would be what. Yeah.
No, that's good, Jane. So let me so Monday, 12 noon, any comments to authors of sections. So I'm just going to type this, and then it would be then say Monday midnight, authors make final revisions, and then Tuesday morning, then Tuesday AM is when whoever is going to assemble us into one document and get it posted for Tuesday close of business. Is that right? John.
I'm going to do my best to do that. But just like Charlie said, we have other jobs. I have a grant report due by November 1st. I have a different meeting on Tuesday morning that is very important about the dairy industry. So I'm only saying that I'm going to do my best. But when I listen to all of this, I almost sort of think, oh, let's have a revolution. Let's just tell the council, sorry, you're not getting anything from us until we're satisfied with it. I'm not sure what the hell they do. Jane probably tell me that they would dictate, but I don't know. I'm going to do my best. That's all I can say.
We don't, and we understand, I think, to John, your point, people will do what they can. And for some folks, they can't make it work, as Alyssa's noting. Okay, so at the end, we have to come back to just verify this timeline. Let's sit on it a bit. Let's do some work, and then let's figure out actually just how to manage the details of that. Our British originist is the one promoting revolution. That's very interesting, John. I just want to note that. Let's see what we can in the time we have, and we're going to circle back, probably 1:15 noon and see what we can do. So my thought is we want to start, if this is okay, we have 2 of the 3 sections written are kind of the overview sections. That is around pathways to mitigation and then sequestration and storage. And Ryan wrote the pathways one for mitigation and Abby wrote the one for sequestration and storage. So I wonder if we want to kind of have the authors explain what they put together and then see if there's kind of specific questions or comments in particular authors you want to hear from the group to discuss. So maybe Ryan, we turn to you first and you can describe the kind of summary statement you put around mitigation for ag.
Sure, and that's not just me. I don't know why the names of people should be removed. Alyssa provided significant input in the drafting and drafted major section of that. But I'm happy to attempt to walk us through what's in there. Apologies, the line numbers have not been added, missed that detail. So agricultural mitigation, right? It's this crosswalk between both the reduction of emissions, avoided emissions, sequestration, and then potentially substitution, which affects both within the industry and then outside of it, as the pathways for mitigation to be achieved. This kind of 1 to 2 page summary is an attempt to talk about the strategies that are available for agriculture broadly to provide mitigation from its emissions, how farms in Vermont are affected by climate change negatively, and why and how they're working to build resilience to more extreme weather events. It's an interactive process that happens on farms. They are tagged with these emissions, but they're also, of course, affected by climate change. Talking broadly about the way in which, soils, water resilience can also be achieved at the same time. When focusing on soils and soil health as an example, there's opportunities for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience to all be achieved through the same practice. And so quantification that happens within agriculture for mitigation, there are other co-benefits that need to be considered, whether it's strictly for climate or other air, water, soil, health, or social considerations as well. talking about food security and how, having a resilient agricultural system is important for that consideration as well. 10 actions are forwarded below. These are the 10 that were put forward under the mitigation pathway in that first section. Trying to tee up that these are those that are most readily implementable, that can have a discrete quantifiable impact on mitigation. Planting seeds happens maybe a couple times a year. It's something that can be leveraged very rapidly and can have a direct impact very quickly. And then also talking about the current scale of adoption and how there is a groundswell from agriculture in Vermont to adopt natural climate solutions, and how they are cost effective and can be delivered below the social cost of carbon. So that's kind of my rambling summary of what we're trying to frame in there. And then we go into some detail on those top 10 key actions, and attempt to be very detailed as to not only what the potential impact is as far as scale of current adoption, but what literature suggests, the potential opportunity that exists from leveraging many of these mitigation strategies, whether it's nationally in the US or some global figures, just to try to contextualize that these are cost-effective and effective mitigation strategies. So trying to give some body to that.
And a question: Do you all want us to project this, and you can take a look at the writing? How best do we kind of handle the people want to look at it on their own Word document? How do you want to do that, Judy? And Judy, you're on mute.
I have an immediate question, and I'm not sure if it's because I can't see it or what, but my question is, so I understand that mitigation is to take care of severe problems and make it better, right? But is there anything in here that will allow the land to take care of itself? Or are people manipulating what they think is best for the land?
Yeah, so I mean, Jude, that's a great question, right? Anthropogenic climate change. That's how agricultural land use is tagged, right? Land managers and landowners, farmers colloquially, cultivate the land for the provisioning of food and fiber. Where we, and I'm not an expert on this, but the broad bucket of natural climate solutions encompasses those practices that use biological means to either reduce emissions from the soil surface or add biomass to work to sequester both above and below ground, whether that's, for example, the addition of cover crop in an annual cropping system, or what's also included in here are those edge of field riparian forest buffers, and also the integration of woody biomass in silvopastoral and agroforestry systems. And so I don't know how best to, you will see those themes and those actions, and looking at those biological processes as themes that run throughout these actions, and they in this framework fall under the natural climate solutions framework, but would welcome any feedback on how best to put forward other considerations in that regard.
I appreciate the comments you just made, Ryan, but everything you just commented on was somebody manipulating the land.
So,
and my question is there anything in here to allow the land to heal itself by itself?
Two things to note is this section, I want to just be clear. So this section this is the section that gets kind of put up into cross sector, correct? And it is intended to focus strictly on agriculture. I just want to be clear about where this thing goes. Is that correct?
Yes, but you're calling it mitigation. Right. So mitigation should allow the land the opportunity to care for itself.
Absolutely. And where, crop rotation and long-term fallow are, cropping principles that are used in other, countries, They aren't widely adopted, within Vermont, but cover crop and crop rotation as we work to develop. And I think part of these recommendations are looking at existing state programs that support the adoption of conservation practices that have multiple co-benefits for the environment. If there are ways to, integrate those principles, I think that there's certainly an opportunity. But to acknowledge, to Pat's point, these are, the non-CO2 emissions that are quantified in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which are directly tied to active management of the landscape to provision food and fiber. How can those processes be amended, altered to, reduce emissions or sequester carbon? And to your point of fallow, there is in here, of course, those programs that take land out of agricultural production and put it into whether it's a permanent wetland easement, whether it's in a 15-year rental agreement for a crep buffer, or other river corridor easements, which allow for the land to do as it will when active farming activities don't happen there by agreement of the farmer. And so I do, think some of that is reflected in these 10 action items or key actions.
Let me suggest two things. Our actions E and F are connected to Judy's point in part. And I wonder though also to Judy's point, if Ryan, you can think about folding in some languages, Judy, to kind of let land and natural resources do some of the work, and that it's partially captured in sections, whatever, E and F, and it's also really captured much more extensively in our other pathways.
Because we've been talking about that. We've been talking about headwaters and river corridors and letting them, automatically create riparian zones to protect themselves. And that's all I'm asking. Is there some place in here where we allow the land to be the land and care for itself as a form of mitigation?
So what is
I think so. I think it's in this section. I think it's in CREP program that we already.
And this is why I'm asking if it can be put up when people read it so we can see that.
And Judy, I can definitely put this up on my only whereas it's so thick, it may be hard to sort through, but you want to try, we can certainly try. I don't know, Marion, if you have this one in front from that we could just project and take a quick look to see if people can see it. And if it's too thick, we'll have to, I think, have the good comments we have and ask the authors to incorporate the point, in the draft over the next goodness forbid, few days.
I can, sorry, remind me which one it is. I'm not super familiar with these drafts.
It's the agriculture mitigation section 11, 10, 28, 21. And Alyssa,
if folks would like, we can pull them up at the beginning for the framing as people go through them each time, if that's helpful.
It would be helpful to me.
Let's do that way we can. And while we're waiting for that, Alyssa, you had a point? Alyssa, I think you said something about the adaptation pathway. Do you want to say more about that?
Sure. So in the adaptation pathway, not this mitigation one, there is quite a bit of language around allowing natural ecosystems and rivers to do what Judy's talking about. And so I actually am hoping that Judy might take a close look at that pathway draft and offer some edits and make sure it kind of captures some of that.
Okay, so people can see that, and maybe we kind of quickly just scroll through that. Again, this particular one, the way that we the documents frame goes up to the cross sector, and it covers agriculture specifically. Ryan notes the 3 ways that you can kind of do mitigation for agriculture, and then there's detail that follows, and maybe we scroll down a little bit, Marion, if we can. Sorry about that, or Jane.
So this is what I'm talking about. Where in those 3 comments does it say to allow the land to take care of itself at certain points?
This is the definition from the International Panel on Climate Change as to how the ag, forestry, and other land use sector can provide mitigation services that can be quantified in national greenhouse gas inventories.
Well,
It's a pretty specific charge. And so within that, I think sequestration, right, is a representation, and how you get to that is allowing, is in some cases de-intensifying the human management, which I think, to your point, is that those two buckets of programs, which are edge of field riparian vegetation planting, whether woody or not, or the permanent easement programs for wetlands and otherwise that are included.
So thank you, Ryan. But what I'm saying is prevent emissions, sequestration, substitution. Where's number 4 saying allow the land to heal itself?
Abby?
I think part of what we're running into is, Judy, you're raising really a really valid point. I think that the tension that exists here is that Ryan is trying to frame this within the language of the Global Warming Solutions Act and tie it into the ways that the law is requiring us to move forward, good, bad, or ugly, right? Like, I think as a group, we all understand the limitations of the language of the law. We've done a lot of work to try to to learn here in this space. I think what we're witnessing now as we're putting things together is the fact that work hasn't been done yet in the legislature. That understanding doesn't necessarily exist in all of the different realms that are working to try to put together the plan. And I think that's what you're flagging, is this tension point between how we honor what we've learned, honor different perspectives, all within the context of, it's like the timeline. There's still this deadline, imposed deadline that we can't change. And I think, I'm guessing from Ryan's perspective, what's happening is this exists as the language that's defining how we move forward with this from the law. And maybe we need to frame better in the paragraph below how to address what you're talking about allowing the land to heal for itself. I also do think that is covered, and to Alyssa's point, in other places in our draft.
I appreciate that, Abby, but I have never thought throughout this whole thing that we had to put our final report into a box. I thought there were times when we were thinking out of the box and we were going to use things thinking out of the box. If we don't think out of the box and we keep putting ourselves back in the same box, we're not going anywhere.
I tried some language, Ryan, for you to consider, just to add to the end of the first paragraph to really flesh out sequestration related to Judy's point, but just a thought. But Jake, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. And considering, Patrick, just what you added there as a possible amendment, and to Abby's prior point, there may be a way in which, in the paragraph below, just to explicitly call out that those three kind of approaches do not exclude, allowing to Judy's point, allowing the land to heal itself. So, I don't think there's anything in 1, 2, and 3 that necessarily implies that isn't a legitimate way to achieve mitigation through agriculture. I think, I think in the through management changes language, that's just acknowledging, I think, to what Ryan was saying previously, that, in the agricultural sector, there are land managers who make decisions, and one type of decision that they can make is to allow land to basically, kind of be left to its own devices. That is a decision. And so I think it feels like there's two tacks, sort of adding language to what is official kind of, sort of official language that's pulled from international kind of, international processes, or to just clarify that, explicitly that those three kind of pathways are not intended to exclude what Judy, I think, is bringing attention to.
Let me just aware of the time, and I note that at this point, let's have a little bit more discussion, and then if people do want to submit written comment, and if people can, because we're short on time, people can make suggestions for trying to incorporate a concern, we'll do that quickly and recognize some of this is going to fall on the author and it's not going to be perfect. And also note we'll see some other sections that might help some of this too. But Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, I'll just say, Judy, I share a lot of the same thoughts. There's a lot of sections on a farm parcel that were farmed decades and century before and are no longer and are left to their own devices as folks focus on making the best use of the most productive land, and that's often not quantified in any of these, whether it's the carbon budget or the emissions inventory. We're strictly looking in boundary for the cultivation of land for food and fiber, which is the specific charge that we have here. I absolutely think that the strategy to take land that is less productive and putting it into a management which allows for natural processes to grow what wills there is absolutely included in this section. And in this second paragraph here, I think emphasizing, I think it's included when we talk about natural climate solutions. And if we want to call out that option, can certainly work to try to put a mention in there. But I do think it is included, both in how it's written and in the actions below, in my perspective.
Again, so under our ridiculous constraints here, I think what might be, Abby, I know you wrote the section on sequestration and storage of carbon. I wonder if it's also looking at that section as well. So I think we had some good comments that asked for some changes to this section to kind of clarify this point. And maybe we could look now at Abby's section and take a look at that. And so this one would be called Draft Pathways for Sequestration and Storing Carbon. 11.2 is the name of that document. And Abby, do you want to kind of describe what you, and I know you had some help with maybe Allie and others to kind of what you wrote up in this regard?
That would mean that I remember what I wrote in this regard. I know I'm not supposed to say that. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I will. Okay, so one of the questions I think I have about this section is how to create in the narrative the reality that there's an overlap, right, between the mitigation context and the sequestration context, but then calling out within this framework that that there's different aspects to the sequestration and storage. And I also became cognizant while I was working through it that, I am a farmer. I work with a variety of ecosystem functions, but I'm also, not working specifically in the forest sector or dealing with wetland restoration and things like that. And so that's why I asked Allie and Alyssa to look at this. I want to make sure that this section accurately reflects the breadth of sequestration and storing carbon potential in the range of ecosystems, and that my voice as a farmer isn't too heavy in how I framed this out. I'm not really sure that I got there. So that's one question that I have. Then the other question that I have is just whether it's, whether the framing works for, to Judy's point, sort of the balance between this is the technocratic world in which we live and the way that we view these systems and things like that. However, this is also what we've learned and seen represented here in the subcommittee, and trying to craft a bit of a different narrative as to how that could be approached. So I'll leave it there for now.
And Marion, putting that also in the chat is super helpful. Thank you for doing that. So again, Abby, thank you for this. I mean, people may need to take a more time to look at this in terms of the forest balance question, as you pointed out, Jane.
I do just want to say that I was trying to allude to this earlier, but since Abby mentioned it, I do think it's really important to ensure that the connection between the framing and the emissions reductions and this section is genuine in the plan. And so I did share, Megan O'Toole is taking the first draft at that section for the emissions reductions, and I shared with her Ryan's drafting on the agriculture section to start to think about how to speak specifically to agriculture up in that section. So just want to draw your attention that it'll be really important for you all to look at that section when it gets posted next week, also to ensure that it's telling a compelling story that ties the work together.
So other questions and thoughts, and again, I think the first paragraph in part, it begins to try to really get at the important point that Judy made a minute ago as well. Judy.
Abby, I was just scrolling through this. Do you mention traditional ecological knowledge as a form of agriculture?
I don't believe I did, so I should correct that. I think I referenced, you know what, I honestly don't remember. I didn't. I know I did not write. I did not write those words in there. I think I referenced, nope, now I'm thinking about my pathway. Never mind. I need to fix that. That's an oversight on my part.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And I'm going to noting some of these things in chat as we go. Other comments or questions on Abby's section here? For folks in the forestry side, to Abby's concern about not being kind of overly balanced towards ag, I don't, if any forestry folks have a comment now or can take a look at this to give her any final feedback on Monday, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, having not had time to read any of it, it's hard to comment. So try to do that. Thanks.
Great, Charlie, thank you. Okay. Now I think our third section, which is this generic kind of language, I mean, generic's not the right word, but this overview language, I think we have one also for adaptation and resilience, but I don't think we have that written yet. And Lauren, I think we were leaving that one for you, you lucky person. So I think that one is outstanding in terms of the third kind of overview piece we don't yet have. So is that, Jane, is that right? I think we don't have that one piece.
That's right.
Just also a note, I'll try to keep some key points in chat just so we have track of them. We can save that so it's available just for the authors. Authors, as you hear comments, if you could just jot your own notes, because we kind of manage all this. It's not going to be probably perfect note taking on our part. So just to let you know. Lauren, thank you for being voluntold. Appreciate it. Okay. So if it's okay now, I think let's actually dive into each of the sections. We've got a little bit of comment for both Ryan and for Abby's part. And obviously people will have till Monday, and Lauren's kindly agreed to kind of do the next piece. And we'll make this all clear, hopefully one more time at the end before noon. Okay, so I think pathway A, and Ryan, that's really, I mean, this pathway A gets kind of, is it part of it goes in, and this is where I get confused. Does all of pathway A go up into the cross-sector mitigation, or does part of pathway A stay down kind of with our recommendations? That's what I'm not clear on. So Ryan, can you speak to that?
Yeah, this is a good question. Within the climate action plan, between section 11 and section 14, those have been the sections of the CAP that we think parts of our tab A fit into. We've attempted to ensure parity with how cross sectors recommendations are going to be framed with regards to cost effectiveness and impact, that we meet that same level of detail for the agricultural sector. So what you see before you, and this is and again saying, Alyssa and Judson helped with the one we reviewed first, and then if you pull up agriculture ecosystem A, what we've the challenge and kind of been chatting with Jane is, under 11, we think it's appropriate to include the full suite of review that's been conducted for ag mitigation strategies. And then collaborating with Charlie for the forest sections and taking the A mitigation tab, I'm unclear on where this is supposed to go. Is this supposed to go under 14? Is this supposed to go under 11? Is ag mitigation that we just reviewed with the long summary statement, does that go in another section of climate action plan? So that was a clarifying question I was hoping to better understand today.
Jane, I don't know what your sense is here. And then again, this covers kind of the original way we designed pathway A for our group.
But the sequestration tab is not, they've been combined.
Wait, sorry, what? I thought my understanding after our conversation this week, Ryan, was that we would lift up all of the agricultural work into the emissions reduction section, mindful that you would have the ability to write the framing section there that spoke to the intricacies of meeting emissions reductions while also enhancing sequestration and how that work couldn't be pulled apart, and speak to that, and then speak to the agricultural strategies and actions comprehensively up in that section. Does that make sense?
Sure, for mitigation, absolutely, that makes sense. What we're left with is a balance of other things within a tab that focus on forestry, focus on process, focus on emissions inventory, and that's where I have questions about, is section 11, section 14, are those distinct from what you just framed, which is putting the ag mitigation up in front?
Jane,
I guess I'm literally just not aware of the structure of the action plan, where this is going to go, because these are the other mitigation strategies and actions that were in the mitigation tab that aren't directly tied to
I get it. Yep, to
reduction.
agriculture. Oh,
Well, they are related to agriculture. They're just not actions that have a concomitant mitigation emission reduction coefficient.
So one question, Jane, for you, to Brian's point, is because the subcommittee wrote this pathway as kind of a integral kind of ag working lands forestry piece, and Ryan has done it so it follows the same format that we asked of these sections, and then there's obviously repetition or in the mitigation piece, whether we can just in some cases be redundant because we want this pathway kind of holds as a whole, as long as it's consistent.
Yeah. I think that's completely okay. And so this would go down comprehensively together underneath the sequestration section. Yeah.
Just a question.
It could.
Sorry.
I feel like that might be where it fits, given the forestry component and the other supporting strategies and actions aren't necessarily appropriate upfront, or not upfront, but in the other section.
Yep.
Okay, just a clarification question. Marley's having a hard time finding this document. So this one is on the website, right? It's Ag Pathways A, section 11, section 14.
That's not, I'll post it in the chat. That's not how it's titled.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just called Pathway A, I think, in the, I called it, yeah.
I can put the download link in the chat.
Thank you. And Mary and Marley, we'll try to be really clear. So this is, now we're essentially looking at our original Pathway A and then the write-up that's described. Okay.
And to that end, what we have are those same strategies and actions, the same framing and mitigation, but they do see sequestration too. And so what we've taken is the more concise framing of the actions and then the review for impact and cost effectiveness within this Pathway A. And the new stuff that we would want to discuss with Charlie and some of the other things that we've been talking about in Ag and Eco are down below this first strategy and set of actions on the screen in front of us.
And that's Ryan, consistent with our spreadsheet, right? Our matrix.
Yep, it's the same. It's just the other section has more details. This is here to say, yep, it does sequestration as well. That's one part of the equation. Here they are, and the concise framing of that.
Great. Judy.
Brian, again, is there language in here addressing concerns about what they're using, the language they're using around forestry and ag systems, like low-grade wood?
Not in the ag sections. You're gonna have to ask.
The answer to that question is
Charlie.
no. Yeah, that's not addressed here, Judy.
So if you're going to talk about forestry here, should you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the discussion we've had on that's really important. I don't know where it fits in the current plan. I mean, we're talking about kind of overhauling a major economic system of working lands.
We're talking about equality.
No, we are. I mean, but it's, yeah, I think we have to have the conversation you're saying, Judy. I just don't know where to have it in a way that helps frame specific recommendations and comes up with that common vocabulary that works and does it in a way that's functional to what we're trying to do here.
Which
So
brings up my point from earlier. If it doesn't get in by Tuesday, it doesn't get discussed.
So I'm trying to think, I have two thoughts. One is I think we need to figure out where it would go, and we need to figure out the paragraph, whatever, of this language that we need to write up. So what, Judy, I don't know if you'd be willing to write up, the sentences or language that would try to describe the kind of the very careful, important use of language and how we treat it. And then the question is, where would we place it? And I don't know whether it goes in one of the general descriptions we have under sequestration, adaptation, or whether it goes in one of the pathways, kind of upfront. And I don't know where best it would go. But do people have a sense of, if we have the language about the care of language, where best that could fit? So it fits into the whole.
It's not necessarily about the language we're using. It's about the language that our agencies are using. And that whole system of that whole philosophy of how they look at it is not equitable. And that needs to be addressed. And a recommendation simply would be to address it. Address the language the agencies are using so that it now reflects an equitable way of life for the land.
So do people have suggestions where that might go?
Jane, do you have a sense as to whether that, I think what Judy's getting at is such a broad issue, right? And is something that is going to have to be thought about as we move forward in this iterative process of transformation, essentially, right? Like if Vermont is going to commit to engaging in the tenets of just transition in the face of a changing climate, that will mean at a certain point that the language, our frameworks, the way that our literal government is structured, et cetera, will need to go through various, self-examinations in terms of how it's structured and how it's approaching work. And so I'm wondering if, like, what Judy's getting at should be written into the just transitions component, because it is such a broad framing. It doesn't just apply to agriculture and ecosystems work. It has to apply at some point to the entirety of our work. That's the only thing I keep thinking about, is it seems to be doing an injustice to what Judy is bringing up, that it would only be tried to be captured in our framing or our pathways. It seems like it's a much broader piece that needs to be captured in a different section, but maybe I'm off base.
Jane, what's the possibility of the just transition language incorporating some of what Judy said?
They met substantive. Oh my! Can you hear me?
Yep, sound good.
Okay. They met substantively last week on the drafting that they're doing for the implementation section. They have 3 broad buckets that they're trying to speak to for implementation. Public engagement, where what we weren't able to get to, what we still need to do. They have a large component of drafting around public engagement. They have a large drafting around the scoring rubric, equity concerns going forward through implementation. And then they have this broader piece that could encompass what Judy's speaking to. While you keep talking, I have an outline. Let me just pull it up and look at how they're tackling that work and speak to it. But their implementation is quite is great, and they'll be meeting on that to flush it out. A final draft next Thursday. A draft of that will be posted on Tuesday, and the group is meeting on Thursday to discuss it.
So two things, Judy, if you know anything about how to incorporate your concerns and points, are you comfortable if we find a way to incorporate in broader language appointments, either in just transitions or somewhere in our work? Or are you looking for a new and specific strategy or action?
I think both. I think it as a big category, just what are they called? Just transitions could incorporate it. But I think we also have to have a few words about it. Okay. Because we just can't overlook it. Everything is connected to how they look at the land, and the language and the philosophy of how they're doing it is not right. And so you can't ask them to change unless their rules and responsibilities have a different direction.
Charlie, you had a point.
Yeah, I agree with Judy that we have to address this. My concern is that if we try to do it with just a few words here or there in our sections, that it's not going to translate. I mean, we're talking about like shattering centuries like of
eugenesis
of stuff. I mean, like we're talking about like, yeah, like smashing the system and rebuilding it, which I think is like a good thing a conversation to have. But like I've tried to have this conversation with like 3 or 4 of like the most progressive foresters I know in the state over the last week or two, just to kind of help me talk about it and get feedback and these are like super progressive, like ecologically minded, and the looks I get are like, I don't understand what you're saying. And so this is a conversation that's going to take a lot of conversation and time and back and forth and learning. And I feel like if we try to just like pigeonhole it here or there, it's just not going to do it justice. And
that's why I'm saying have it at great lengths under just transitions.
Yeah, which I think is good. I just worry about
have it mentioned here as well, but not in such great detail.
So yeah, so if there's something written in just transitions that we could cite in these sections, I think that would be good. But I worry that like if we stick a strategy or an action in here that tries to take a massive thing and put it into like 6 lines of text in a chart, it's not going to make sense. It's not going to work.
My suggestion would be this, if people are willing, is I think if Judy's willing to draft kind of the language, we get that to just transitions, and maybe somehow James make sure that just transitions doesn't just consider it but uses it, and then we take a truncated version of that and we can figure out as we put this whole thing together where to put a reference to that in maybe shorter language somewhere in the narrative.
I can certainly commit to trying to make that happen. They have I just don't want to overpromise, like taking language and using it, because they have a group of people working on it. And so I know that folks met yesterday to come up with that first draft. And then I know Sarah Phillips and Beverly Little Thunder were meeting today to go through the draft. And then they were supposed to get a version to Stu Midner and I on Monday before posting on Tuesday for us to look at. So I would encourage and connecting Judy to Sarah Phillips, who's sort of leading the coordination of getting that draft post reviewed and put together, but just want to make sure that I don't overcommit to like having language put in when they have a really thought out process moving forward right now.
Jane, can you give Judy that email so Judy knows who to contact with directly? And then
I'll just email now next those folks.
Okay, great. And then Judy, if you're going to draft something up, then we will work to try to get this in a few places at least.
Okay.
And then at least it'll be a placeholder. Okay. Anything else on pathway A people want to raise or discuss before we go to pathway B? Okay. And Ryan, I think what we agreed to do is kind of leave it in as you wrote it with ag and forestry together, recognizing it's consistent but redundant in some cases, which is just fine. And then Judy's going to work on some language that we fold into hopefully dress transitions, and also in one or more of the sections here to make the important note and the really big idea about thinking really differently. Okay, pathway B. Who is the primary author of pathway B?
That's me. Alyssa.
All right, Alyssa, over to you.
Okay, hi everybody. So I led this one. Billy Coster led the last 4 actions under this pathway. And, you know, of course, this one would have been best written probably by Lauren, but she was out. So I tried my best to include some background research and some good framing, and hopefully Lauren can take it to the next level. I also really hope that Judy might take some time to revise this one to make sure that it's, you know, just phrased appropriately and including all of the things that the 2 of you had conversations about earlier. So this is pathways for adaptation and building resilience in natural and working lands. And so there's kind of a short framing that really talks about how this pathway includes lots of strategies and actions that merge science-based knowledge with traditional knowledge and technical advisory services to support natural and working lands in both absorbing and recovering from the impacts of climate change, and also enhancing resilience to communities around them. So I think the most important things to mention right now is, one, if you care about this pathway, please take time to review it and offer suggestions. The other thing is that I think some of these are kind of straightforward. There are a few I'll just highlight that I think are worth bringing up for the group. One is that the way that I approach the equity considerations was to suggest ways that the actions could be implemented that would enhance equity, because it really wasn't called out in kind of the title of the action. So the things that I have in there now are things like, you know, enhancing the equity of the strategy. You could include traditionally underserved communities or impact communities in the design of the trainings and the programming to better meet those contextually specific needs. And then any kind of incentive program could offer differentiated rates and enrollment preference to address equity concerns. So higher rates for people that are underserved or that we really want to include in those. But I think there's a lot of room for maybe other ideas around equity. And so if folks have just a moment to offer how they addressed that piece of this assignment, I would love to hear that. I think action 3, or strategy 3, if you could just scroll down to that, Patrick, that's the one around promoting funding for nature-based solutions and including traditional ecological knowledge efforts. And I tried to reference kind of other work that's been done to do that. And I think this is one that I really hope that Judy and Lauren edit a little bit, but this includes a whole bunch of actions, and I think it's important. I just, like in the equity and implementation piece, I tried to note that, like, including local Indigenous experts in figuring out how to implement this makes a lot of sense, and also that they should be compensated for consulting the state on how to integrate TEK, and that there probably is some background research or work to be done on the state agency's behalf to approach that knowledge exchange and communication in a more kind of culturally sensitive way. Yeah, so that's the first 3. And then, you know, a lot of this is really about managing natural and working lands for biodiversity and forest health and climate resilience. There were kind of some late suggestions to take some of the actions that didn't have or some of the strategies that didn't have actions that were being elevated, and to turn them into kind of their own action that could be elevated under a different strategy. So this one here is kind of where we put, I think under strategy 4, there are a couple actions that were previously like their own strategies without kind of pieces that were elevated. So that I think that's how that played out. There are some suggestions for doing research that hadn't been elevated but are included here. And I think at this point, maybe I'll just pass it off to Billy to talk about other things that came up. I know there was one strategy that we didn't do that with yet, and it might be nice to hear if that seems like a good approach to do with it. I think it's the very last one. Strategy 9, that doesn't have any specific actions that kind of met the criteria for prioritization. And so we could potentially turn that into a specific action that goes under one of the existing strategies, or kind of talk about whether or not we take it out. Okay, and then at the bottom, there's also the glossary of terms suggestion that was in the directions for how to craft this. And I tried to just reference kind of like existing experts for how we define these terms, but if folks don't like the ones that I pulled, we should totally change them. Okay, so Billy, why don't you add anything that you want to, and then we can open it up to folks for feedback. And okay. Billy's here, right?
I muted myself. Whoops. Billy. While we're waiting for Billy, Alyssa, Kai had
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there he is. Okay, Billy, go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll come
sorry.
back to comment.
So thanks, Alyssa, for drafting and coordinating all this. And I guess the only thing I'll add is that, I would ask Lauren to look at this. There's a few places where I suggest adding some kind of statistics related to some kind of flooding events that I think you may have access to, just to kind of drive home the points of some of these strategies, in this one and above. And then, there's a few citations that I use to kind of define certain terms and like river corridor and things of that nature. If others think there's better definitions or sources for that information, please feel free to swap it out. I just kind of pulled stuff from A&R that I thought might be relevant. And then, on this last one, there are no actions that were tagged as priority or high priority in the matrix. So I did fill it out, but I guess a question is whether we want to either elevate a action or whether we just pull this into another strategy. I think there are, let me just look here. I think there are strategies up above that this could nest under. So in the interest of time, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. And even though we don't have a specific action, we still have the strategy and a little bit of analysis of the strategy, correct, Billy?
Pardon me, what was the last thing you said?
I say we even though we don't have actions, we do have the strategy and a bit of an analysis of it broadly.
Yeah, I wrote up a brief summary and scored it just so it was there.
Okay. All right. I want to go to Kai's point next, but any questions to Billy before I do so? And Kai, I think you have a good suggestion that people are supporting. Do you just want to verbally state that so the authors kind of hear it and know kind of how to incorporate it? So Kai, over to you.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate this conversation that y'all are having today. So as I'm looking at some of the sections around equity, there's a few things that I think are going to be important. One, I do appreciate the wanting to include statements in each of the sections. They sound a little, they get a little rote, a little repetitive in a way that feels disgenuine. But so just to be aware of that there are some nuances between some of the different actions that could call out for more specificity in those equity recommendations. Because again, this is what you're saying to the folks who are going to be designing these pieces. Equity could be included here and should be incorporated here in these ways. And so while you may not have deep specificity around that, you can make those more directive. So thinking about saying, instead of impacted communities can be included in the design of it, that they need to be included in the design, right? They need to be included in the design as subject matter experts for this work. And then there was even, I believe, some additional, let me get back to one of the other ones that I saw. So, and then saying, so because there's some language that's saying more like can, so removing the cans to, again, something a little bit more declarative. So targeted programming will be developed to meet contextually specific needs. Another thing that I'm thinking of around this that could be helpful as well is if there are actions where you have already seen, so for example, where was I? Sorry. Just so that you'll know, looking at action 2 around promoting and incentivizing the climate adaptation forest management practices. So here it could even be helpful to state, you need to identify who are the traditionally underserved communities. We're saying this as though people know and they don't. Like, that's what we're realizing through the equity analysis, is that people don't know. So that could also be a directive you're giving to the people who are going to read this, to say, you need to identify who those underserved communities are. They need to be consulted in the design of this work, and they will those programming, that the results will be developed to contextually meet those specific needs of those constituencies, if that makes sense. So just trying to give a little bit more, feel free to step into that space, because again, these are recommendations you're giving. And so part of that recommendation could be to say, with more declarative statements around, again, your intent on how they're going to look at equity in the design of your actions, if that makes sense.
That's really great feedback and input. I've been taking notes, so I'll try my best to include all of that and welcome anyone to offer written feedback to us. Are there other direct questions or concerns? I realize there's one piece of this that I probably forgot to highlight that I will maybe after I hear any other direct comments.
Melissa, just one thing to broaden Kai's point. I think if every chapter author could kind of take her good points about be specific where you can and be declarative where you can, I think that probably applies to all of us in our and the section. So just ask that maybe everybody take a look at that, given her good advice. I've got Judy and then back to Alyssa for another point.
Great.
Judy, over to you.
Thanks, Kaya, for bringing that up. I just want to say, often people will say, in categories like this, they'll put Indigenous people or Abenaki people or something like that. And we have no reservation. We have no place to call home. So what you're looking at is people who have been pushed, in many cases, to the margins of towns, to the margins of rural areas, so that they can still live in a manner in which they've always lived, hunting off the land or gathering or whatever. And so being as specific as saying that, I mean, look at Burlington. Burlington is number 7 on the list of cities in this country for urban heat islands. And those places are where some Indigenous and other cultural groups are living. And so I think looking at those places and naming those places are important, just like Kaya said. Thank you.
And to your point, David, I don't know in your section on land use, whether that kind of point about, Indigenous peoples essentially having no land of their own and being pushed to the margins, and that makes them vulnerable in all sorts of ways, would be maybe important to call out explicitly there. And I wonder if it goes partly under land use.
Sure, I can take a run at that.
Okay, thank you. All right, Alyssa, you had another point I think you wanted to make on this section.
Yeah, I think just the last thing I wanted to elevate is that this is the pathway under which the recommendations for talking about, revamping a state planning office or creating an interagency office of climate change are housed. And I did my best to articulate and highlight that those are things still kind of being debated. And so the actions are written out much longer with the pieces of the conversation that I recalled in terms of pros and cons. And I've got a little asterisk at the end that says there wasn't full consensus, but they were ranked high enough to be elevated to the document. And so folks that maybe have opinions or input on that, please just, take the time to look at this and offer written feedback. I'll do my best to include everybody and keep it kind of balanced. But that is under strategy 5. I think it'd be too much time to read through it and rehash that conversation now, but I just wanted to let folks know it's in here, and that's where you can offer some input on it.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for the good work and doing that. Okay, so we've got Kaya's really great advice about how to be more declarative and more detailed where we can on equity, both in this section and elsewhere, and Judy's point about Indigenous people's particular situation in Vermont, and David will incorporate that into the land use piece up front. And then Billy, I think for the last strategy, rather than try to debate actions at this point late in the game, is maybe we just leave the strategy without actions and the table, and it's it's there because it was a strategy that the group supported, imperfect as that may be.
Yeah, whatever folks want is fine with me.
I do want to get to one more pathway before we take the public comments. So Alyssa, anything else you want to cover, or Billy, on this one before we go to C? All right, why don't we then go to C? And I need to, okay. All right, so C is the one that no one else volunteered to do, so I did. So that's, bear with my imperfection there. So I think if maybe we want to pull that up, it's section C. There is actually one specific item we definitely want to talk about. I wrote a little bit at the paragraph at the beginning, welcome any comments on the language that I used. And then, tried to add a little description of the strategy, a little bit more narrative, and then the actions just pulled from the table. And then, did my best to kind of fill in the kind of the different criteria. And what I found really useful, even though we are in desperate short time to have not have done a fair and full equity screening, even trying to think about it was really helpful to me to realize each of these has some potential issues. And so it was really helpful to even at least cursorily think about it. It was really helpful to me to really think about equity implications. I think the only piece that really we need to talk about here is the question of biomass. So we have a kind of placeholder at the end because we were still working it. And so that's what Charlie and Judy have pulled together, a beginning of something. And so I think now Judy and Charlie makes me think that's what we should probably spend our time on for this section, is talking about the language that we've gone back and forth. It's still in draft. It's not fully agreed to. It's just, it's a piece to work with today. So Judy and Charlie, do you want me to project that language and we talk about it? Okay. All right, so let me try to do this in this format. Bear with me. Let's see here, so I can do this. All right. Okay, can people see my screen okay? Okay, so let me just describe what we did, and I'll let Charlie and Judy weigh in. We described a new strategy for biomass, so because it felt like it didn't fit in the other ones. We wanted to offer a definition that was pulled from a Legislative Council report from 2012, very specific to kind of what biomass should mean. Doesn't always mean in practice currently. Action 1, we already agreed to last meeting, so I just left that in. Action 2 is really getting at the real question about wood pellets, where they come from, what they're comprised of, and what it really means for GHG emissions and any other number of things around wood pellets in particular. And 3 is, even though there's interest in kind of scaled community-based biomass, there's still a lot of questions about both its GHG implications and its other implications to kind of local air pollution, and also the implications of, if it's not done right, it strips forests in ways that are not helpful in regard to kind of sequestration, storage, and adaptation and resilience. So action 3 essentially calls for more research and understanding, because that's probably where we are today. Judy and Charlie went back and forth, shared some articles with you all. They've got some longer language with further explanation, but aren't quite ready to share that. So we thought we'd start with these, so we at least have a placeholder in the draft plan. So Judy and Charlie, over to
you. Well, as you may have guessed from emails, Charlie and I don't always agree. But there are 2 articles here that I really think you should read. The first one is a UVM study in which they come to the conclusion that using biomass in small scale operations like schools is equivalent to using fossil fuels, for the most part, because they're not using the definition of biomass that we're using, but also because they're using too much fuel and electricity and so on and so forth to run their operations. And so the end result in this report, or this study, is that it's the same as using fossil fuels. But Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that we're interpreting that study correctly, to be honest. I am not a subject matter expert in the greenhouse gas accounting of this kind of stuff, and so I rely on subject matter experts. That study was commissioned by the Northern Forest Center. I've reached out to them to kind of get more background here and kind of clarity on the results. One thing I'm really concerned about is when we look at studies, which are good sources, but then pull certain pieces from them, but not understanding the whole context and then kind of elevate that one piece. So I think the key here is that we need more research. We also need to better understand the research that exists before we put forward strategies and actions based on it. And so, you know, I think that we've got more homework to do on this before we say one way or the other what we're going to support, not support, expand, retract. I do think the one thing that Judy and I are on the same page about is that, you know, as far as recommendations in the climate action plan to get to the goals of the climate action plan, you know, expanding the existing large scale, industrial scale electrification facilities is not a tool to get to those ends. And so, you know, I think that's something that we are in agreement about, is we're not going to look to that to meet the goals of the climate action plan. There are other things we can look to, which do have some, I'll say bright spots, at least as far as I see, as alternatives to transitioning from fossil fuels. But again, I would just say, read the papers that are there, do more homework. But I am really cautious about taking things from papers that at least I don't fully understand completely yet. So
Allie had her, sorry, Charlie. Allie had her hand up, so I was going to turn to Allie.
Hi, everyone. Yep. I just want to say I'm really happy to help you all interpret scientific research like this. This is sort of what I do in my job as a forest ecologist, as I help folks understand science and what it means. And I will say that this paper, the first one, really looks at where the material comes from for pellets. So it really depends on, so it sort of outlines the complexities of saying which fuel source is better or worse, because there's so many nuances with forest harvesting. So that material could come from mill residues, which would have been decomposed anyway, or it can come from, so that's what it looks at. And there's differences compared to fossil fuels depending on what material is used, and also the harvest decisions that happen on the landscape. So it sort of lays out those scenarios, and I'm happy to help you all navigate that and really get to what this paper is showing. And there's also a number of other papers I can help you all with from around the region that have looked at this exact question.
Which brings us, Allie, to the question we've been tossing around. If the wood pellet businesses are not harvesting properly, if they're not distributing, if they're distributing to Europe, say, who are back into the same situation they were in the 1400s, where they're lost a lot of their trees now, who oversees this? We're not sure who oversees this process, and who manages whether they really are doing it properly or they're not doing it properly. That's one of the questions I've had right along.
And Ellie, in part, Action 2 kind of names that in part to really, again, it's a research point, but it's to really get at some of these questions that you raised, Ellie, and that Judy just raised as well. Billy, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you all for trying to work through this issue. I guess I have just kind of a question and a concern. First, you know, while I understand that some harvests of forest products can be solely for the purpose of fuel, I know that a lot of wood fuel comes from harvests that pull a number of different products out of the forests. And I don't, you know, are we saying that, I'm just concerned that this is going to kind of depress the ability for Vermonters to use modern wood heat to provide thermal applications in their homes and businesses. I think this is going to be, continued support for modern wood heat for thermal applications is maybe, and I think is likely going to be a recommendation out of the cross-sector mitigation group. So, you know, I'm all for researching and looking into doing things better. It's just not clear to me if this is intentionally neutral, if this is suggesting any kind of support or opposition to modern wood heat applications and the value streams that go to Vermont landowners from the sale of wood fuel.
Bill, I mean, maybe try to crack at that then Charlie, but I think action 1, I think we agreed to last time, but it is actually a specific action. 2 and 3 are research, in part because I think people don't know, and in part because I don't think we have agreement among this group about that question you just raised. So that's why 2 and 3 are framed primarily as research and try to name some of the kind of issues, but it's not trying to weigh in on the actions because I don't think we would have agreement. But Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's neutral right now because I think we don't have consensus on what we're wanting to put forward. But there's this need to, for some reason, put something forward by Tuesday because that's when the deadline is and we got to do it, which to me is completely screwed. So yeah, we're going to put forward a neutral recommendation that's completely vague and doesn't mean anything, but that's what we're going to do, I guess. Or we're going to figure out this entirely complex subject between now and like Sunday night. So I don't know. And the other thing here that you brought up is we have no clue what cross sectors doing with this topic, if they are at all. So yeah, like who the hell knows what we're doing, but this is what we've got. And to your point, like, yeah, I do personally, I think that we have an opportunity here to use what is called modern wood heat to transition off of fossil fuels. I just think that like, instead of running around and cherry picking little pieces from papers, we need to have a much more in-depth look at this, but there's no time for it. So that's where we're at.
Judy.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're finding documentation, Billy, that says that the improper harvesting of the pellets could result in being the same as carbon output as using fossil fuels. The same. That's what some of the articles are saying. So we need clarification on that. If that's what they're saying, do we want to encourage something that is going to be the same as fossil fuels?
So question for the group, imperfect, I think as Charlie said, is since we can't do his B, which is figure this all out by Sunday night, you know, this is probably the best we can do to make sure there's
I do want to jump in. You know, I appreciate that, Judy. My focus here is supporting the maintenance of Vermont's forests and a mixed stream of revenue to landowners to make sure that they don't need to turn to other land uses like development to cover their stewardship costs of those lands. And you know, I think that highly efficient thermal applications of wood fuel procured in Vermont for use in Vermont is a good strategy to kind of both mitigate climate change and maintain the storage and sequestration that our forests offer Vermonters. So I do feel strongly that based on the research that I've seen, that's a reasonable option. So that's my own personal opinion. I appreciate that's not where the group is, but again, I'm wary of looking at kind of isolated findings in individual pieces of research that kind of raised doubt on that without having a more comprehensive conversation. So I guess I appreciate and understand that we're at this neutral point because I guess that's as far as we're going to be able to get.
Which is why we are generic in how we state 2 and 3.
Great.
Because we need more information. We need to know how these pellet manufacturers operate.
Okay.
And I think you would be interested in that too. If there's no or little oversight and they're, according to this report, not doing it properly, it would seem that A&R would be interested in that.
Absolutely. I just have not seen the report, so I don't know what they're talking about.
Let me turn to David Mears.
And I don't think we know what they're talking about is my point. That I just want to say again, like, I don't think we fully understand what that report says because we are not subject matter experts in how they're measuring that stuff, which is why we have ALI, why we have other resources to go to, but we don't have time to do that. So yeah, right. Like part of me is like, screw it, just pull the whole damn recommendation out because if we're going to be vague and neutral, then what the fuck is the point, right? So yeah, sorry, a little frustrated, but love you guys.
I'm going to go to David and I want to kind of make a way forward, just, you know, so as we keep going here, David.
It seems to me that we should be recommending that the subgroup, the task group that we worked on forest stuff felt that we should be, and I was part of that and agreed with the recommendation that we should be promoting the use of modern wood heating systems as one good use of our forests, both from a climate standpoint as well as keeping forests as forests. And I'm not sure why we couldn't have a recommendation that says we promote the use of wood and wood pellets for wood thermal use in modern, wood heating systems, and that we also have concerns that it be done in a manner that is sustainable and does in fact result in the storage and sequestration of carbon. It seems to me we can both be supportive of this, which I can't imagine anyone disagrees with the idea that we should be encouraging the use of wood for heat in the state of Vermont. It would be an absurd assertion to say that we shouldn't do that. But I totally agree with Judy that there are some important questions that we should have answered. And why can't we both promote it and recommend it and also say, and we should be, researching to make sure that we are implementing those programs in a way that's sustainable and stores carbon effectively.
Exactly. And I wouldn't want to promote it, even though you think it's absurd, if I knew that they were not harvesting properly and there was no oversight.
So let me just, Jane, you put in the chat, there is apparently someone doing some analysis, which obviously, again, to Charlie's point, we have no time to deal with, but can you just note that what's going on elsewhere about that, Jane?
Yeah, they're associated with the LEAP modeling that's supporting the emissions reductions recommendations and actions. There are some sensitivities being run that look at like if the population grew really dramatically, and there's also sensitivities to think about how we measure and track biomass within the greenhouse gas inventory and if there was a spike. So there's some really concentrated work being done on biomass for the emissions reductions component. It might be going forward educational to bring the consultants in to speak to the work they're doing around biomass and how we track it in the emissions inventory and beyond.
So I want to just check about a way forward. I mean, I think given that I don't think we have consensus on the word promote. So I think this is the best we can do, horribly imperfectly as it is. And I know Charlie's shaking his head. So we need to do something for today. So we can have, I said, as Charlie noted, we can leave number one, action one, which we've already agreed to, and just not do the rest. We can forward
I
this.
am not comfortable putting forward action number one without having any other language around the use of wood in this frame, to be honest. Like
Charlie, we already agreed on that one last week.
We had a consensus on the action, but not on how it's framed. And like, if we're gonna start just, putting forward individual little pieces, like I agree with that action, but like, if all we're gonna do is just toss that one little action in there, but not have anything else in it, then to me, it's not getting at what we need to get at.
Charlie, I need you to be specific and concrete with me. So what do you need to make this thing work to move it forward on Tuesday?
I need to have language in here that gets at exactly what David just said in a way that we can reach consensus around, which is why I feel like we're spinning our circles, because I'm not comfortable just throwing one little recommendation about what we can stop doing without having things that we can promote and advance and look to. So yeah.
So let's say actions for number one might be reducing the amount of log trucks that come in every day to Reigate McNeil would be an action. Another one might be reducing the size in which wood chips are coming by train every day. Because when they were first approved with being the center of 100 miles. Now they're out of state collecting all of this. And if they can't operate and function properly within our state, what's happening when they're clear cutting out of state?
So a question, David, you had a thought in your mind of some language. I don't know whether we're going to crack at that and somehow we're going to go to other sections for a bit, and David could work on a short language that we could put in the chat to look at in a minute. I know, again, we don't know what cross sector is doing exactly. I mean, one option is whatever we put forward, then we actually notify Climate Council, hey, we have had this discussion. We have not correlated with or coordinated with the cross sector. This needs further discussion. We can certainly highlight that too. David, I don't know, at least maybe one more try when real time. I don't know when we're going to go to the next section for a bit for D, which I don't think
Yeah, I'm working on some language right now. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so again, we're not there yet. I'm going to take down our screens. I have to look at this for a moment. We'll see if we can get there with another suggestion to meet Charlie's interest of trying to both say what we're not going to do, but also what we possibly can do, and also understanding we have some more understanding we have to do. Judy, any other point? All set? Okay, great. All right. All right. Let's see. Our next one is D, which is viability. And I think that was either John or Abby.
Are we gonna pause for public comment right now?
Yes, thank you, Bill. We should. Yes, we should pause for public comment. Thanks, Bill. Yes, we should. Thank you. Over to you.
So we've got some first opportunity for public comment. We'll have another one later in the morning. If folks could raise their hands. I see Annette and Jennifer. Anyone else interested in speaking? Okay, Annette, take 2 to 3 minutes if you don't mind. Oh, and Cheryl, so Annette, if you could take a couple minutes, then Jennifer, then Cheryl, please.
Responding to the comments about what cross-sector is doing, I just put a link in that I think might be helpful for you to review. From what I can see, what is going to be coming to the legislature for action in this session, which is what you all probably should be aware of, is a recommendation for a clean heat standard. That ties into your discussions about biomass. A recommendation for 100% renewable energy standard. That ties into your energy section and your land use section and perhaps some other sections. There's also going to be recommendations on transportation that involve joining TCI and some other things. So it's a relatively short list. I think that it would be helpful for you to look at it because from what I can tell, based on what I've been observing from the various subcommittees, it is those recommendations from the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee that are going to be getting the action in the next legislative session, where your comments really should be viewed through that lens so that you are putting sections in that are helpful to the legislature when they take it up, because there isn't going to be more time once they come back in January. So I may have other comments later, but that's I thought that might be helpful to you right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Nat. Good suggestions. Okay, Jennifer.
Thanks, everybody, for this really important hard work that you're doing. I have a suggestion for your submission on Tuesday, and that would be the possibility of submitting a draft on Tuesday to the Vermont Climate Council and suggesting that you will then take the time to look at that, to look at all of the drafts and read them and have opportunity, what little opportunity you probably would have, to revise them, and that you would meet again on Friday and then submit a revision. And so that you're submitting something on Tuesday with the acknowledgement that you haven't had a chance to do everything you would like. And clearly, even at that point, it won't be everything, but it'll be something more than what you have on Tuesday. And also with the notion that you have not yet coordinated, making clear that you have not coordinated with, for example, cross-sector. So that is one possible suggestion, short of a revolution, but a tiny revolution. And my other comment that I'll make now has to do with noting that I think Alyssa's drafting and others who are involved in that drafting does a good job of including TEK, for example. And that is an example of including equity within a section that you're writing. And that also needs to be in just transitions so I think it is this dance of including it in just transitions, but acknowledging it and including it also within each of these sections. And I think that was an interesting and good model to take a look at. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it is amazing work. I don't say that enough, that you all are doing and putting a lot into it. And I agree that you all should have a revolution. And I'll be there to stand behind you to the council. But anyway, I wonder if so getting to my comments, I wonder if there maybe should be more specific spelled out recommendations on things like, the amount, the percentage of things like natural lands, forest lands, wetlands, et cetera, that are to be left non-working. And that really there ought to be more specific, details on the recommendation of like amount and size of buffers, which brings up the agriculture and the grassed waterway and filter strip program reference, which I think grassy strips are, bare minimum and not really very effective for many things that we want to do to mitigate climate change and clean water, et cetera. So that is another equity issue. So in agriculture, also there was no-till referenced. Often, I guess no-till people will tend to use herbicides, and that should be spelled out that that's not an option for no-till here, that I imagine you all agree with, since that's again an equity issue, where we're it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. No-till and using herbicides were like we're causing more harm than good, I think. And then as for the biomass, which is pretty hot topic, and the other options, and yeah, Abby, I get it. That's right. There are problems with just about everything now still. There's nothing that's just really not impacting negatively. But I think that for both heat and electricity, we do have other options that are also not impacting, habitat and, other species like the trees, for example, and everybody that uses them. So it's equity not just for humans, but for habitat. And, that's another thing, spelling out really how much we need to protect or restore of the natural lands, an actual concrete amount, so and I know this, well, that I won't bring up the other thing, but I guess that's it, sort of a little bit.
Thanks, Carl. I know that we do have a concrete amount of percentage of forests that should be in an old forest target in our recommendations, I believe. Yeah.
I'll jump in here. I think I'm next in line. Good morning, everybody. This is Zach Porter with Standing Trees. And I am just first off, just wanted to add to Billy's comment. I think we're jumping into land use in just a second. And yes, there is a component there for the VCD Old Forest target, which is fantastic. I applaud the subcommittee for keeping that in there. And actually, one of the things I wanted to just mention here is that I think there's an opportunity to weave those VCD targets and just more generally the science behind the exceptional abilities of old complex ecosystems to increase climate resilience, to sequester and store carbon throughout this set of recommendations. So, for example, we were just going through the building resilience and agricultural, agricultural, natural, and working lands pathway. And in that section, section 4 of that document, manage natural and working lands for biodiversity, forest health, and climate resilience. I wanted to just point out a couple of places where there could be, I think, a relatively easy change made. Letter F says protect forest health and biodiversity through direction to Vermont Fish and Wildlife programs. And it says, and promotion as a primary objective of state and municipal lands and UVA. This reads a little bit unclear to me. And I'm not really sure what we're trying to say here, but I think that it's trying to get at some of these concepts of promoting what's in Vermont conservation design, for example. But I'd love to see that more explicitly stated here. And perhaps we could tie that to the state hazard mitigation plan too, which also points to the value of old complex ecosystems for storing water through drought periods, reducing flooding, and really matches up well with those biodiversity and resilience kind of goals that are in Vermont conservation design. So anyways, just wanted to kind of point that out as one place where we could make I think a small change. In the intro paragraph for that section of number 4 there, there's this kind of statement here: research is needed on new and emerging climate adaptation strategies in working in wildlands. And again, I've said this before in comments, but there's really, I don't think, a lot more need for research in a lot of the things that we're talking about here. The science is there. And so what we need to do is incorporate the existing science and the traditional ecological knowledge that Judy's been talking about since the beginning of this process. And I think if we get kind of too into the research and analysis, we're not going to take the necessary actions that we are completely justified in taking at this point based on a large body of existing science. So this is, the idea of restoring Vermont's natural ecosystems, the ecosystems that were here for millennia. There should be no question in the subcommittee's mind whether that would be a good thing for the future of resilience and carbon storage in Vermont. And I really struggle with why that is suggested as kind of something that needs more research. Let's aim higher, as Sue Morris said at the last meeting that we had last Friday. So anyways, thank you. And I know we're short on time, so appreciate the chance to make a comment there.
Graham, feel free to make a comment, and then we'll move on to our next agenda item.
Thanks, everyone. This is Graham, Policy Director at Rural Vermont. I just had a broader question about these recommendations you're going to be submitting. Given that the deadline is Tuesday, I guess my question was, is there going to be an opportunity for public comment on your finalized recommendations and then another revision process? Because I don't think, after we submitted our comments earlier, it was really in relationship to this whole process and a much earlier distribution of really sort of high level recommendations. But now that you're getting into these more granular ones, is there going to be an opportunity for public comment and then more revision?
Thanks, Graham. I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm sure we welcome public comments at any stage of the process through the portal. I suspect that, from this point forward, comments will be really going to the full council so they can determine, how and whether to revise subcommittee recommendations as they pull together a final plan. But I would defer to Jane, Abby, or Lauren as council and steering committee folks to answer that.
I honestly think, Jane obviously will have the official party line on this, but I just want to say too that I think this is one of the places where the building the plane while we're flying or crashing it, depending on which seat you're in, I guess, has meant that that's not I think that's not entirely clear to any of us. I don't know that we have. I'm not entirely clear, or I am still feeling uncomfortable with the thought, energy, and level of detail that was provided in the public comments, for example, that we received from folks like you, Graham, and then just my personal limitations in taking all of that in and trying to work that into what we're putting forward. again, this is, this is what Charlie is referring, and all of us have been referring to it the whole time. And I think the limitations of the process have also meant that that's a little bit amorphous still. I think it would behoove us to have some type of a structure like that is a little bit more, as I understand it, traditional in how these things move forward, that there is a public comment period. But as to whether that exists in this process and or the constraints around it, I am not clear.
Thanks, Abby. And thanks, Billy, as well. I think the other question I just had is, and I'm not going to be able to stick around for the entirety of this meeting, so I couldn't see all the future recommendations, but are there any sort of more system-based recommendations related to, more localized, regionalized food systems, localized food production, even at a non-commercial scale, diversity of land access and ownership? Do those figure into these recommendations at all?
We haven't gotten to that pathway yet, but they do exist in the, not to the level of granularity that they will need to in order to actually implement changes in that regard, but there is language referencing that in at least the pathway that I tackled, which is, I think, economies. So yes and no.
Thanks, all.
Billy, any other public comment before we jump back?
I do not believe so. Thank you.
Okay, so on the language that David suggested on biomass to add as an action, if people could look at that and just if kind of I think in chat briefly know if that's okay, or if it's not, we'll return to it in a little bit. But I want to get through D and E and a few more before we come back and try to kind of close on that one. But we will definitely do that before noon. So next up is D. And John, was that yours?
Yes.
Okay,
so
let's do it.
First, the caveats. I am not an academic writer, and I'm sort of blown away when I look at all the things the rest of you write. And second, if you have comments, which I'm sure you will, please send them to me in email, because I'm not going to be able to write fast enough or type fast enough. I don't type at all, to take note of them. So please feel free to email me directly. So I took the assignment and basically took the spreadsheet and tried to put stuff into words. Take the spreadsheet and convert it into the English language, as I understand the English language. I absolutely accept that my tables of preliminary assessment are my words, and listening to Kaya talk about being decisive and everything, I'm sure she's going to be very disappointed with what I've written in some of this, and I'm quite happy to spend more time on it and work on it by Tuesday, of course. So anyway, I don't know what else you want me to say at this point. I don't know, and I'm sure a lot of you, if any of you, have had a chance to read this, so it may be something you'll just have to send me comments over the rest of today and over the weekend.
No, John, we want to give just an overview, so that's very helpful. So any initial quick comments or thoughts to this section? And again, people, if they have time, certainly can provide comments to John over the weekend or by Monday. And again, I know there's some side conversation in the chat about biomass. I want to keep that to a minimum and just recognize that David's language put forth with an idea. So I just need just members to react to that one way or the other, so I kind of know on the chat. But for John, any other final thoughts on viability for now? And we can provide some comments later as needed. John, thanks for doing it.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track. I think it's well written and to the point.
Okay, great. All right, the next, John, anything else? Okay, I think the next section was, let's see what the next section is, close out of this one. Was economies, and I think Abby, that's yours, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
It is.
Marion, I don't know if you can project this and Abby can explain a little bit about what, how she worked on this one.
Let's see. Yeah, so this was an interesting one to frame because I was trying to balance between sort of the tensions I feel as a farmer attempting to navigate the current situations as they exist and what I understand to exist in the forestry sector, et cetera, with all the learning that we've been doing from Judy's perspective about, and I think the more that I've thought about it my own as the type of farmer I try to be, that economy cannot drive the rationale behind, you know, why we're doing things. We want to try to shift. No, we need to shift the framework under which we're approaching economic development or sustainable economic development. And so I tried to capture that here in terms of, again, the language is not strong enough. It's not enough. A lot of this work will have to be done. The devil is in the details and will have to be done as it's implemented on the ground, particularly regarding, you know, issues of land access, equitable funding strategies and frameworks, the prioritization of how those things are addressed. But I attempted to frame that out here, at least at a high level. And then additionally, it was awkward to try to figure out how to work in the fact that we had pulled a lot from the farm to plate strategic plan. I also wanted to acknowledge that we are aware of the fact that the farm to plate strategic plan and that process was not perfect, and that, you know, moving forward, we want to improve upon the things that we learned in navigating that process and do better moving forward, either with anything that we're taking from that strategic plan and utilizing, and or any similar plans that are developed in the future, i.e. with a forest plan, to Judy, you know, to the work that Judy and Charlie have been doing and what I've witnessed there, that, you know, language, framework, philosophy, things like that need to be discussed in the process of formulating the plan towards the future. Whether I have captured all of that appropriately in this document, I assume not. That was my attempt. So do with that what you will.
Right. Questions or comments for Abby's piece so far? In all your spare time, if you have additional comments you want to share with her by Monday, certainly welcome to do so. Any questions on this section? Okay, David, maybe we go to the next section, which is.
Judy, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I couldn't get the button to work. I'm sorry. I just saw the little comment about Ask Judy tenets. It's their values. I guess tenets is the same word, but
that I will definitely, that was why I wanted to ask, was how you thought it would be best framed. So values it is.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Judy. Sorry, Mr. Ian. Okay, good. All right. The next one is land use. And I think, David, this was yours. David did the remarkable job of actually doing evaluation for each action as well as strategy. So he gets extra credit. And you want to share kind of what you've done. And I think there was an issue or two you did want to raise. So over to you. And David, if you're on mute, we don't hear you yet. So
yeah, thanks. Took me a second. Thanks for that introduction, Patrick. Just to refresh people, because at least I find myself swimming a little bit in the complexity of this. But just as a reminder, the recommendations we had under the land use category fell into the categories of, you know, how do we ensure that we're managing, in general, the overall idea was how do we manage our land in a way that protects the ability of our natural lands and working lands to continue to provide the ecological functions, carbon and climate benefits and other co-benefits. And we have on those categories include generally good planning and community engagement from the local to the state level. It involves providing incentives like current use to encourage people to manage their lands in those places. It involves conservation work, land conservation, paying people to keep their land open. And it involves regulation like Act 250 or local ordinances and planning. And of course, we already have in Vermont a really robust system of land use controls and protections. We know it's insufficient to achieve our goals, and a lot of our recommendations are about how to improve those. And I think in this area, it's fair to say that my view of the way my characterization of our recommendations are to not reinvent the wheel, but to work within the existing programs to make them more effective. I also flagged and tried to flag in various places that one of the fundamental challenges for land use management in the state of Vermont is that we have really inequitable land ownership patterns. The manner in which we have pushed the Abenaki off the land and the relative lack of access for people in the BIPOC community to have access to land is a fundamental challenge and kind of infects all of our current systems. So we have to look at both improving our systems from a climate and carbon standpoint, as well as address the inequities. So with that, the things that I would just quickly flag here for feedback were they're both fairly technical questions. One is down at section sorry, it's long.
Okay.
I think it's 3.
Can you give me a line number, David? Then I can just scroll to that.
I'm getting there. One, on 3D, there's create a statewide environmental justice policy. And then in so that's one. I just wasn't sure if this was the right place for it. I'm not sure that it's the wrong place. I wasn't quite sure why it was in land use as opposed to kind of an overarching proposal. And then there's one here, I'm just not finding it for some reason, that was about a forest practices management system, about like encouraging the use of burning and vegetation management, a system of vegetation management called coppicing. And which I support and was fine, and I evaluated, but I also wasn't quite sure why it was in the land use section. So those are two technical questions for folks to consider. And then should I stop there? And then I've got a third question about renewables and planning.
Yeah, let's do those first two. So question is on the environmental justice policy. Does anybody have a suggestion about where's the best place for that to go? Right now it's in land use, as David noted. Is there a better place to put it in terms of supporting the statewide environmental justice policy? Kaya, I don't know if you're still on with us or not. I don't know if you have any thoughts about where potentially that should be put. And I don't know, Kaya, if you're still with us or not.
I am still here. Thanks.
It kind of gets lost in the land use piece. That's why I think David's raising it. We're not quite sure where else. Everybody agrees. We're just not sure where to put it so it's prominent and clear.
Give me a minute. I'm gonna keep looking.
Okay.
I mean, just while Kaya's looking at that or thinking about that, I found it's 2B. If you go to section 2, which starts on line 50, and go down to the comment B, it has support efforts to passively manage forest land by fire and coppicing, which it was kind of like my Sesame Street moment. It just didn't seem to quite fit in the land use category. I don't know if there's a better place for it.
Okay, Jake.
Could it be an adaptation, maybe? Within the section of TEK that Alyssa framed up earlier?
Maybe while we're on that, Jake, did you have a thought on this question or another one?
On the environmental justice, I mean, that just feels like it's an overriding cross-cutting issue for the entirety of the plan. So I feel like it needs to be elevated more prominently, and existing throughout this plan. Environmental justice is not just limited to land use decision making. So,
Jane, maybe to this question.
Yeah, I wanted to articulate that there is a cross-cutting pathway of an supporting a statewide environmental justice policy that is in the climate action plan, as if you look at the current outline and draft. So it is a cross-cutting pathway that will be elevated for the council to consider. Senator Ron Hinsdale spoke to the current EJ bill proposal on Tuesday at the council meeting to help familiarize councilors with the concept of an EJ bill. And so, yes, that's a cross-cutting pathway. So I will also just say, I'm curious, I know Lauren is part of I know Lauren hasn't been available, but I know Lauren's given a lot of thought also to, there's a cross-cutting pathway group, Chris Cochran, Lauren, and Chris Campany are working on related to compact settlement. And so I'm curious how and what, and the intent of that was to have this action, that recommendation elevated as a cross-cutting pathway and not to have it be duplicative within other sections of the plan. So I'm curious which sections here, or just for future thought, to think about how and what strategies and actions here embedded in the land use section in which I know is greater than compact settlement here, will be will live here or will live in the cross-cutting pathways section. So just future thoughts. I'm imagining some of these will get pulled out also.
So let me ask this about the environmental justice piece. Are people okay? Understanding that it's in this other cross-cutting section and is recommended to the full council. Should we remove it kind of embedded in the land use, or do people want to leave it there just to make sure there's a placeholder for sure? But what's people's preference?
Can you scroll to the, like, what does the actual recommendation say?
It's just that, it's just one sentence. It says adopt an environmental justice policy.
If I may, I think it does. I think as Jane was describing it, it probably makes more sense to have that in the cross-cutting components of it. If there is a, the preamble or whatever to this committee's entire suite of recommendations, it could be mentioned there again. Whether or not it will feel duplicative, I think, to Jane's point, is important. Not that it's dropped, like in the same way that we're talking about equity in multiple places. We're not trying to say that it's a done deal just because we talked about it once. But I think as a specific policy, I'm pleased to see it, but I don't know if it would feel awkward being called out here and not in all of the other pathways, if that makes sense.
That's very helpful. So I think let's pull it out of this, pull it out of the embedded. Judy, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. I don't want to pull it out. The reason I don't want to pull it out is because I was on the panel discussion with Keisha and Carolyn Feeney to discuss this. As written now, there is pages of environmental justice concern for people. There is not one word in there about environmental justice for the land. Not one word. And so my whole presentation on that panel discussion was about getting language in there about the land.
So I hear you, Judy. I think what I was thinking on that was, that's what I'm saying, that as a whole, the recommendations coming out of here need to state that that's going to be necessary, because the work that you're talking about in each of the pathways coming out of this committee are much more reflective of the work that needs to happen on the land. And so, not saying that it's not included here, but it needs to be included as an overarching theme for the entirety of it. Because creating a statewide environmental justice policy is something that we do need to do. Is that something that the stakeholders in this particular sector need to do? Or is that something that as a whole needs to happen? Do you know what I'm saying? So I feel you. I'm wanting to make sure it's there somewhere. But I also don't want it to feel edited out. I don't want it to feel edited out later down the road. But so that's where I would say, again, as stating that intention, of this committee and of the pathways that you're putting forth, that is something that you are expecting and needing in order to make this work, have the endurance and the equity that you're looking for.
Well, my point in questioning this is just, I want it somewhere, because if it's not in your face, it won't be considered.
Jake, did you have a follow on to this?
Yeah. Well, I think just something I'm hearing Judy say too is a little different. Like, there's something a little more specific to say that, yes, we should have a recommendation around creating a statewide environmental justice policy. Maybe that, goes somewhere else, but that I think Judy's also saying that such a policy should include just, considerations for justice for the land. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there.
My suggestion would be twofold, is that I think what this language would read, create a statewide environmental justice policy for people and the land. So it would need to say both. And then we find a place to reference it in one of our higher level order places. And we also make sure this conversation is happening in that cross-sector group too. Judy? Judy, you're on mute. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so we're going to add land, people and land, and then I think we need to make mention of it in one of our narrative sections. We'll have to figure out which one of the three, and then we also want to forward it to the cross sector. I want to go to coppicing, and whether, I know Ally had a concern about passive, we can get rid of the word passive, but I do think where this goes. I'm wondering, Alyssa, since you did adaptation section B, whether you could see it fitting maybe in there, or one of the foresters, if you see it fitting better in another section. Anybody have a thought about where we can make this, flow a little bit better? Judy?
Again, that was my suggestion. Where it goes doesn't matter to me, but it was in response to the discussion about all the management of land and how people were going to manage it here and manage it there and manipulate the land. And it just seemed like another traditional way of doing it, opposed to other harsher management techniques that were being discussed at the time.
David, do you think it's okay leaving it there, or do you feel strongly it just doesn't flow and needs to go somewhere else?
I don't feel strongly about it. So I'm happy to leave it there. I saw a note from Ally that made a good point, which is I didn't edit any of the recommendations, by the way. So I just put them in as they were. But reading this, it does the word passively may not quite fit here because it's suggesting some active engagement by humans. But I'm happy for it to be here, and I strongly support Judy's point that there's some really wonderful traditional ecological knowledge that we should consider in terms of how we manage our forests. And I don't think that we have probably in this state fully realized those opportunities.
Judy, if we revise it to support efforts to manage forest land by fire and coppicing, is there if we strike the word passively?
That's fine.
Okay, let's do that. And then Charlie, maybe you have a thought about where best this could go.
If I remember correctly, the only other place that we get specifically at forest management practices is in pathway A. And so if we wanted to keep them together in terms of kind of the bucket of activity or actions, they might go better under that pathway. But I'm wondering if, and this is a question for Judy, if maybe it's a broader statement around looking to traditional ecological knowledge in forest management, and not getting down the big conversation around blowing up the system, but like if this fits better under those practice kind of actions and recommendations.
Well, pathway A is mitigations, right?
Correct.
Yes, but that's where, that's the only other place that we get at kind of incentivizing certain kinds of practices, I think, in the forest as far as that specificity goes. So I was just saying, if we wanted to keep the actions kind of together in that vein.
Yeah. To me, it's just trying to, like, before I brought that up, I don't think anybody considered it. And so for me, it's just not a mitigation, but more of a education. Hey, there's another way to manage it rather than cutting down trees. And burning is going to awaken the seeds on the land and give you diversity in that forest, that type of thing.
I think only partly, I think probably to continue on, maybe I think it's okay where it is. We'll strike the word passively. EJ, we're going to promote to a broader statement and add land as well as people. And then David, I know you had a third thing, which was the renewable siting, I think. So maybe you should raise that issue.
Yeah, thanks. So Marion, just to go in terms of the document, if you go all the way down to line 80, starting at line 82, section 5, there's one of the two recommendations we have in here are both focused on incentivizing or requiring solar and wind to be established on already developed areas or already disturbed areas as opposed to farms and forests. One, as I looked at it, I realized it felt to me like a little, while the first one, letter A, does include a reference to citing policies, rules, and regulations. It didn't reference one of the more concrete things that that I know of that's underway in Vermont, which is the work by regional planning commissions to do inventories of opportunities for how we can do renewable energy siting. And I think, my sense is that's been a fairly significant shift in and some important resources invested in it. I also understand from a number of folks that a number of people don't feel satisfied that that's working effectively in terms of driving decisions by the Public Utilities Commission when they approve renewable energy siting. So I wanted to, let me throw this into the chat. I just jotted, this is really rushed, so it's too long. I didn't have time to write something shorter, but I wanted to include something that I thought referenced planning, because we have planning in so many other parts of these recommendations that we should be thinking about how planning for renewable energy fits into our overall system. And I apologize, this is very late in the day to be bringing up a whole new recommendation, but it just jumped out at me as a gap when I was looking at this.
So let's give people a minute to look at the language in chat and see if anybody has questions, and then we can test whether to include that as an additional action in this section. Jake.
Yeah, I appreciate what David is putting forth there. And the only thing I'm curious about is, does any of the new legislation around these plans actually have any kind of requirements for review or assessment? Just curious. I'm not really familiar with it. So, but yeah, I mean, I agree with the notion that's being expressed there.
Judy.
Oh, damn.
Sorry. Would anybody object to including that language as an additional action under number 5, strategy number 5? Anybody object to that one?
No, I actually, thank you for bringing this up, David. I think this is one of the things that I'm struggling with sometimes too is we have these systems that currently exist, and there's all this work that's being done at the moment, and without, how does all that tie together, and how are we remaining accountable along the various chains and programs and things like that? And so I think that, a certain amount of actions in that regard are going to be necessary if any of our recommendations are going to mean anything, is understanding where they would need to be embedded in the frameworks that currently exist. So if we feel like this does that, I'm in favor of it.
I like this concept. I can try to answer Jake's question a little bit. So the enhanced energy plans that regions are required to produce and towns are authorized to produce at their discretion, if they're done and certified by the Public Service Department for compliance with the criteria, the siting decisions in those plans garner increased weight before the Public Utility Commission. They in theory should be driving siting and would prevent or make it extremely difficult for projects to be sited in areas where those plans say that they shouldn't be. I don't know that that has been tested much so far, but I think that's the concept. Those plans also provide direction under some of the incentive programs for the standard offer and net meter rules, which are incentive programs for renewable generation in the state. Areas identified under those plans are considered preferred sites for those incentives.
Thanks, Billy.
And I agree that I don't know that that planning process has really yielded the results that folks had hoped. So I think, David's recommendation, I think that we kind of get under the hood and try to use that process more effectively for a number of reasons is a good one.
Billy, I would welcome, Billy, your help with the language, because I realize it sounds like I'm using the wrong description of the nature of the plans. So I'd welcome any edits you have to make sure I've got that language accurate.
Right, and then I did say towns can do them at their discretion, regions are required to do them.
Judy, you had a point?
Yeah, this is new to me, so I'm trying to understand it. Is this something that we know works?
No, I think we don't know that it works. I mean, we know personally, planning is a really critical piece of land use, and having the regional planning commissions inventory possible locations for land, engage with the local communities to make decisions about where the preferred locations are. I'm confident that that's a good and important step. What I don't know is whether the way the system's currently working is achieving the intended results. And I've heard, from a number of concerned folks, there's some comments in here from folks suggesting that it's not working. So that's the point of this recommendation, would be to encourage some kind of evaluation of whether or not the PUC's decisions are actually respecting those plans, or whether those plans are effectively protecting natural and working lands that are otherwise at risk. Okay,
so I'm sorry to take time here. I don't mean to be sucking the air out of the room, but I want to understand this. In the area where I live, there was a man who owned a farm and decided he wanted to retire. And so he took 7 acres of land and proposed to the town that he make it into a solar array. They said no, because this land is already zoned historical by them. The state, of course, had the final decision and they said yes. So is this the committee that has the final decision? Because if it is, I'd say they're not working.
The Public Utility Commission has the final decision on siting matters of generation. I think the intent behind these plans is to give municipalities more influence over that decision by the PUC. And others can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if a town has done an enhanced energy plan and has identified sufficient sites to meet their allocated load, areas that they've said should not be developed for generation, if a project is proposed there, that position will get substantial deference before the Public Utility Commission. So I think that the Public Utility Commission would be all but required to go along with the town's position unless there was some overarching public good, is my understanding of that process. So it gives towns a lot more leverage in those decisions if they go through the planning process.
Oh, but that in the example I just gave you, that's not what happened. They overrode what the town wanted. And so that's what I'm saying. Do we want to connect to something that we're not sure isn't broken?
I don't know that town did a municipal energy plan. So if they didn't, then they've got very little influence. They just have to determine whether the project is consistent with the land use and conservation elements of a duly adopted town plan.
Okay, so I don't want to add this till I do more research and have a better understanding. Thank you, David, for bringing it to our attention, and I definitely will research it more.
So Judy, a question, so you're suggesting to not include it, to include it with a caveat, or to let David know by Monday whether to include it or not from your perspective?
I'll let David know by Monday.
Okay. That's great, very helpful. Any other comments on this one? Okay. All right, David, I think because of time, I think we're probably we'll move on. But again, thanks for looking at that, and people have a chance to kind of comment on that before Monday. And David, why don't I'm going to copy that right now, and I will, when I send around kind of our action items from today, I'll actually just note that in the email itself, so that language is sitting someplace. Let me just do that right now. Okay. I think we want to make sure we still need to go back to the biomass language, and also I want to give Iris a chance to talk about education. So Iris, I'm going to hand this over to you for pathway G.
So I'll preface this with just saying that I am a high school student and I didn't really have a whole ton of time to put this together. So I just want to do a John Roberts disclaimer there. But I did put that together, and so there's some shorter paragraphs of writing here, and I was not quite sure of the format, and I had started drafting it in the original way, and then all this to say that it's a very rough draft, and I would really welcome any feedback or anyone who wants to even just take another crack at this, because I'm not sure this is spectacular work, but I did go through, I started to go through the equity screen with the 2 strategies. I didn't get a chance to finish it, but they will be done by Monday. So I will add those to this. I will attach those just so that those can be referenced. And there are some equity issues with the second pathway because of the way that land ownership is in the state. So I think that's a really important thing where implementation needs to be heavily considered with an equity lens. But both of them are about education, which is a big equalizer. So I also think that there's a lot of potential for some really great gains here. It's just 2 strategies, but I would really welcome any feedback, any thoughts. I'm looking to go through the equity screen, and then once I'm finished with both of them, because I'm not quite done, adding more about the specific impacted communities into that part of it. And I'm seeing a typo there, so I'm also gonna go back and edit this whole thing. So yeah, I would welcome any thoughts.
Great. Iris, thank you so much for doing this. Questions, comments for the education section for now? And again, people can send comments to Iris or others by, I think we talked about kind of noon on Monday. And Iris, thanks for doing the really thorough equity screen, which is really awesome. Okay, any further questions or thoughts for Iris at this point? Okay, so I think we still have our biomass issue, so let's come back to that. I took David's language. I'm gonna put this up on screen so we can kind of see it together. The finer print at the bottom is the other point about renewables, so don't worry about that. So here's what I think we have at the moment. We have 1, which is the expansion of these large facilities. 2 and 3 is research, and 4 is promote. And then there's some more comments about research related to 2 and 3. The red is what I added to David's language. And then I added the word beneficial sources because I think that's important to Judy about kind of where some of the stuff comes from originally in terms of what gets used. So I'm curious whether we can make any final edits and see if we can agree to this, to include this for this week's draft. Any questions, comments? Can people live with this, or do we need to make further changes to maybe help people live with it?
Charlie and I have had questions all the way through this. And one of the questions that I had that I don't know the answer to, maybe somebody knows. When McNeil was first created, they had set aside 5 acres of land in the interval to grow willow. And they were going to let it grow each year because 1 year's growth of willow is, 4 or 5 feet. And they were going to use that as biomass. They never did that. Does anybody know if that concept has worked, or if anybody is using it now.
Anybody know about that?
Hi, this is Alex. Sorry, I forgot to, I guess I didn't raise my hand. Alex with the Agency of Ag. The Middlebury grew a bunch of willow and it worked very well in the boiler, except that they piled all the chips on the ground in the middle of winter and they all got full of ice. So it worked well at the Middlebury site in terms of growing. It grows great in that type of Vergennes clay, which is super common in Vermont. It's one of the top ag soils that is here. So willow works fine in a lot of places. I don't know what the McNeil did or didn't do, but the trial at Middlebury did great.
So do you think, Alex, that's something we should promote?
This whole question of biomass is like, it comes back to how do you do it sustainably? And I know that word is a little bit overused or under meaning, but that would be my question is, for example, like, let's say you don't manage the nitrogen very well when you're doing the crop, then you get a bunch of nitrous oxide emissions and, what have you gained? So I think it's worth it because partly it has sort of these multifunctional things where it can reduce runoff potentially. It could be a really good forage. It would attenuate the swings in soil moisture and keep soils growing and healthy. It has a lot going for it as an option. Again, how do you manage it in the context of greenhouse gas emissions, especially?
John, you had a comment.
Just on the Middlebury thing, as Alex said, it was a trial, and the willow is still growing there, but they have not harvested it for some years. So I assume it's a trial that was successful, but not successful enough. And now they've moved to burning this gas that's produced on the dairy farm as a result of generation from manure and food waste.
Yeah, that was an agricultural trial to figure out yield. And what I meant was yield was great. Middlebury decided not to go that route of burning that type of fuel.
So in terms of action for, 1 through 4, again, I want to see if we can come to consensus on some language. I want to see if there's any other changes we would need to make to this to make it livable for folks. Not ideal, but the best we can do in the short time. Jake.
Yeah, it seems to me that 4 is either overlapping with prior actions or should be, there's so many sort of sub elements that they should be distinct actions in and of themselves. So just looking at 2, for instance, and the carbon balance of various methods in order to develop recommendations for the most climate beneficial sources, methods, and technologies seems like a more specific articulation of 2, so of action number 2. And so I'm just curious if those could be combined in a way where, the carbon balance is informing, that research is informing oversight, regulation, management, and source and use of pellets for thermal use.
Okay, so we could say like the research and then 2 do the oversight regulation words that you suggested. Okay. Other thoughts on this language? Judy, you're on mute.
I'm not sure that I would put education and oversight in the same sentence. I think there needs to be an educational component for the public to understand, but I also think there needs to be an oversight component. And that again is another question we had: who oversees this? Somebody suggested they get a manufacturing permit. Well, if that's true, then do people issuing manufacturing permits have oversight as to whether they're doing it correctly or not? And then somebody brought up in the chat box earlier too about, well, Charlie said there wasn't any Vermont wood plant pellet places, but there is one. And then somebody brought up that the majority is coming from Canada, which is exactly what happened with McNeil. So when McNeil outgrew their perimeter of where they could go, they started getting trees from Upper New York that were dead ash trees because of the emerald borer beetle or whatever he is, and bringing those here in the form of wood chips. So do we have any system to monitor if our pellets are coming from Canada? Do we have a system to monitor where they're coming from and if they were harvested sustainably?
Can people answer that question?
And I know that currently in the rulemaking process is a definition of renewability for wood fuel for tiers 2 of the renewable energy standard. I know that for McNeil and Rygate, the PUC have certain conditions in place regarding procurement. I don't know if it goes to the level of detail that Judy is discussing. I don't think that's what we're talking about here, though. I think we're talking about new systems in number 4 is my sense for heat.
And Ali just said that she's actually trying to look it up. Jake, comment? Oh, no, you're good. Okay, Charlie.
Sorry, old hand, so I'll put it down.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where, but we do have language in the plan. I don't know if we've tied it directly to this yet because it's new, but on, you know, procurement standards and developing them for uses such as this. So I know that that is something that has come up and we are trying to address it in the plan. And I think the idea here was to kind of promote, incentivize whatever in-state production so that we're not, you know, pulling them from other places for all the reasons why in-state production would be beneficial for all the co-benefits.
Well, that's what you're trying to promote.
Yep, that is what I'm trying to promote.
So I want to just check. I added I took Jake's suggestion and kind of moved part of 2 really to 4. That brought oversight that we don't have the full answer to, as Judy asked. And I just want to see if these would now be 3, but if people can live with these 3. Jake.
Sort of, I'm wading into an area that I'm.
Be careful.
No, yeah, so this is more of just a question of flow of like, is promotion predicated on that research? Because from what I'm hearing, some of the conversation and some of the chat is that, you know, before we kind of decide to put in, like, I think incentives, you know, are potentially very much justified and really important to developing the forest, supporting and developing the forest economy in Vermont. And that has a lot of climate benefits in and of itself. But before we go about sort of putting those incentives in place, is that predicated on doing this type of carbon balance research to sort of establish what types of methods and things we want to actually be incentivizing versus those that we don't? So that's just my question. I have no,
Well, it is.
I don't have any opinions about that.
It is for me, Jake, because if what we're reading says it's not any better, but because of how the pellets are made than fossil fuels, then why would we want to promote it? So what I want is enough information to go one way or another to convince me it's not, it's worth doing and using. Because that one report says otherwise.
Charlie.
And again, I go back to the fact that in the limited conversation I've had with the folks that commissioned this report and have tried to distill it out publicly, they're saying that that's the wrong interpretation. And so my question is like, I don't think it's correct to sit here and say that that report says that wood chips are equal to or worse than fossil fuels. I think that's not a correct, and I can't tell you exactly why, because I haven't had a chance to talk with them yet in more detail about, what I'm interpreting and why, but that keeps coming up. And I agree that if that is the case, then we want to do X, but I am really, really hesitant about looking to scientific papers without the authors or subject matter experts in the conversation and drawing conclusions that we then use here.
So what I've tried to do to Jake's suggestion is start with the one about what we're prohibiting expansion, then talk about research, and I'll figure out a way to blend 2A and B, which I can't do in real time. 3 is about kind of ensuring oversight, regulation alike, and then 4th is promoting, including the education piece. So that's kind of where I think we stand. I don't know if people can live with that or not. Judy?
Yeah, the reason I'm questioning all of this, Charlie, is because I want more information, and we agreed that there was probably people on our committee that could give us the answers to our questions.
So here's the thing, this is all because time has been, the situation has been not our friend, but here we are. Here's kind of the flow with Jake's good suggestions is I think trying to accommodate everybody's interest best we can. And it's in a particular order for a reason, right? As Jake just said. And Judy, I don't know whether you can live this language as written or not, or if you make a suggestion to make it more palatable to you.
You said you were going to work on it, right?
I'll work on 2A and 2B. They need to go together better. That's not good. And I certainly can futz with it a little bit more for clarity for sure.
Okay, when you're done with it, I'll read it.
Okay, so I'll get that out. I'll probably get that out tonight to everybody. And what we'll do is, I think what I'll do is people can give me suggestions, and what we'll do is I just need to kind of know from people if they can or can't live with it as we go forward. Okay. All right, I'm aware of the time, and Jane, I know I have to jump right at noon. I know we need to talk about next steps and process. So I'm going to turn that over to the co-chairs and Jane, just to very concretely talk about how we kind of weave this together once we get comments back from chapter authors, essentially Monday at midnight. But I want to turn this over to the co-chairs and Jane and Marion, just because I know I have to jump right at noon. So good work, hard work, frustrating work. And I will do some action tonight for everybody, just to make sure we know kind of who's written what chapter and all those kinds of things. All right, co-chairs and Jane, over to you. I'll stop sharing here.
Start. Go for it. Oh, okay, you want me to go for it? It seems like there are two discrete sections focused on the sequestration section and the resilience section, and I think it would be nice to think about who wants to be the lead on pulling together that all of those sections together. They can be the same person, they can be separate to deal with workload. And then there's the discrete section of the agricultural section that goes up front, and the emissions reduction section. So I'll just say for the emissions reduction section first, hopefully that'll be simple. Any comments, revisions should go directly to Ryan and Justin by Monday at noon. I'm sort of saying that half as a question for Ryan and Justin, and then Ryan and Justin will be responsible for getting me an updated version to post, Marion and I should say, on Tuesday by the end of the day. And so that, because that is not a larger component because that is not a piece of a larger component, I think Ryan and Justin can handle that independently. Does that make sense to you all? And then we'll move to the bigger pieces. Okay, silence, I guess, will mean
Yeah, I'll just say that works for us, Jane, as far as aggregating comments and working to integrate them. That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. So then there's the two sections. One, the sequestration section that Abby took with support from Ali and Alyssa and others, took the first shot at writing the context, and then the pathways that go under that. And then there's the building resilience and then in natural and working lands that I understand the context is still coming from Lauren and David, and then the pathways that have been drafted to go under that. So I'm more than happy to be the point person to assimilate those documents, or I understand that Marley has capacity to help. If Marley wants to be the lead on pulling together the sequestration one, I'm happy to do the resilience one. I'm also happy to defer that to anybody else who would rather be the lead on pulling the comprehensive draft. Assuming the same timeline that we just laid out for Ryan, I'll comment on the individual sections by Monday at noon, and then a final draft to be posted at the end of the day on Tuesday. Not a final draft. Okay, so Marley, for clarity, I'm hoping that Marley, you would be willing to pull together and ensure that everybody follows the CAP drafting process, the line edits are all, the spacing, the font, all that kind of stuff, and you pull together one document that includes the framework, the context setting that Abby wrote that around sequestration and storage, and then all the pathways under it in one document to be posted. And then, so I'm hoping Marley will do that for the sequestration section. I believe that's section 14 of the CAP. And then the resilience section, I believe, is 13, but I don't have it in front of me. And I'm happy to do that if no one else wants to. And that would mean all the individual sections would come to me on Monday at noon. Oh, sorry. No, well, comments would go to the individual authors on Monday at noon, and then the individual sections would have to come to me by Monday night to assimilate.
So if there are comments on the, I'll use myself as an example. So if there are comments on the sequestration framing, they're coming to me and I'm integrating the comments. And then we need another volunteer to take the sequestration framing and the pathways that go under it, which I do need to say, this is ridiculous to say, but I am not entirely clear which of our pathways are specifically tied into that context still. I'm just not sure which pathways are going under which context or framing. So there's that. And then yeah, that's my question. Which pathways go under sequestration? And
my assumption is that was clear in your matrix, but if that's not,
sequestration is tricky because it's mitigation and so like the economies and viability sections can address sequestration, but don't necessarily. That's where I'm a little. I don't know.
Okay.
Also, I have to jump off to do this people waiting testimony. I'm so sorry. Please send me emails with whatever I need to do.
Okay. Not hearing any other volunteers to take on the resilience section, I'll coordinate that one, and we'll work with Marley to put out a schedule for Marley to do the same schedule for the sequestration one, and we'll coordinate the timeline and expectations and follow up with an email this afternoon with details, so that the individual drafters of the different section get their comments by Monday at noon, and then Marley and I have the different sections and are clear which pathways go where later in the day on Monday to put together on Tuesday for posting. Happy to call it adaptation.
That sounds good. Thanks, Jen. Okay. I guess we're ready to move on to public comment and wrap up for today. Pat, unless you have any other agenda items. Okay, I don't see Pat, so maybe we're on our own here. Annette, who else, any members of the public like to speak? I see Annette's hand, I see Jamie's hand. Anyone else? Jennifer, Zach, John Brabant. Okay, let's go. John, Zach, Jennifer, Jamie, Annette. So John, please go first. Take a couple minutes.
Yeah, I won't take a couple minutes. I'll be really brief. I put in the chat section that I believe this committee, as well as the other committees, have done little to no discussion or investigation into solar hot water. That was all the rage before the PV, the photovoltaic rage hit here. I look out my kitchen window at a solar hot water system that was installed in 2009. I bought it through the VPERG program, and it continues to every day generate hot water, even on sunny days in January. I don't understand for the life of me why no one's discussing this or promoting it. It's a real low-tech technology. It's age old. It's really efficient. It's least impacting. You can put in your backyard, on your roof. It doesn't require all the rare earth metals, or at least not to the degree that all these PV panels. And again, this is a different technology, but I don't know why this is not a subject of discussion. Is it not groovy or something? So I'm asking that you folks shove it in there somewhere. If I were to have more panels and a hydronic system, in terms of like in a cement floor under my wood floors, I could heat this house or at least offset my consumption of wood. I burn firewood and pellets. And of course it already heats up. It heats right now in February on a sunny day. It brings my groundwater temperature from 43 degrees up to 85 to 90 degrees in February. So there's very little additional calories that need to be added. So that's a great reducer of carbon, whether it be from natural gas or whatever your heat source is. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I've read that it's maybe the most efficient, cost-effective form of renewable energy. So good suggestion. Thank you. Zach. Zach Porter.
Sorry there, I just didn't realize that I was next in line. It looked like there were other people in front of me. So I just had a couple of quick comments. First of all, thank you, everybody. And, wanted to just say, Iris, great job on the education section. I had one comment to just add, which is potentially to put in some content around place-based ecological education as well. And in particular, traditional ecological knowledge as well, and kind of learning about Vermont's landscape history, which I think should be just a part of our climate education. So I think those are all just it all goes together, and we want to make sure that that's all in there, I think. And then just one other. Well, I'll just leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for a good discussion today. And I do plan to submit some written comments, which will be, I think, an easier way to share the final thoughts that I wanted to share with you all today. So thanks again.
Thanks, Zach. Jennifer.
Thanks. Along the lines of the action 1 for biomass, I'm just wondering about what it says is prohibit the expansion of current and any new large scale industrial scale electric. And I wonder if it would be clearer to say prohibit the expansion of existing and the construction of any new. I'm assuming that that's what that was intended to be, but I wanted to check on that.
Thanks, Jennifer. We can try to clarify that in the next draft that comes out.
And then I just so you know, I submitted my probably crazy idea for timing into the chat. And just with the idea of you submitting a draft and then saying between Tuesday and Friday, that will give the opportunity, if it's possible for you, for subcommittee members to review each of the sections, because I know you haven't had that chance. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie Fidel.
Thanks, Billy. Thank you all for your hard work here. Just a couple of two quick points on the land use section. David, thank you for your hard work there. In regards to action 1A on planning for forest blocks and I think landscape resilience, just wanted to flag for you all that we have done an assessment now of Act 171 implementation, and the signs are that it is actually bearing fruit and playing an important role. Those are metrics we can share with you. The report isn't quite finalized yet, but I think it's really sound for you to recognize that. And I would just flag that the Act 171 drives the town plan side of things, and then whatever happens on the regulatory side in towns is important work, but not necessarily related to Act 171. So I think there could be just a bit of finessing of the language there, and I'd be happy to follow up with something specific there. One other recommendation that I'd have, which I think is not controversial at all, I think it's really complementary to what you have under 2C and the no net loss of working in natural lands, would be to add something about tracking. We need to sort of aggregate our ability in the state to track land use trends and measure forest loss, agricultural loss, forest fragmentation. We're actually making some pretty good progress on those efforts, but there really is a need to have a stronger driver there to come together and make those tools, integrate those tools and make them accessible. I think it'd be really complementary to the ability to track a no net loss policy. And so I'd strongly recommend that you consider just adding some language so that at a higher level, we can hopefully get more traction on getting those products across the finish line to help in this work. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jamie. Annette, take a little time to speak with us. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to comment on the land use section. On page 4, it's number 1, C and D. I made this comment before, and David Mears, you were not present, but I'm really disturbed to see anyone recommending exempting these areas from downtowns. We went through this last legislative session. I've worked with people who've done mapping of the areas that flood in downtowns. I've worked with people dealing with Act 250 proposals. There are hardly any in downtowns and designated village centers. By the way, in C, there are a couple of typos. And for instance, there's a big project in Burlington that because it went through Act 250, it breezed through the DRB. Don't think local folks are going to protect anything. But because it went through Act 250, they actually reviewed and looked at and were able to protect a wildlife corridor and get water quality monitoring of Lake Champlain for the impacts. Act 250 should not be the boogeyman, and for you guys to be holding it up as we got to exempt it, where it has value, it has real value, and it has value in downtowns. If you want to look at how to do something with Act 250 that improves it, you ought to be looking at how at increasing the staffing, getting a process for the appointment of district commissioners that is not political. There are all kinds of really good things that need to be done right now, but we should really be supporting the Act 250 program and especially the district commission program. I see another case I was asked to look at that the towns just give away the store. And when I actually look at the issues and what the towns have not done, it is absolutely shocking. And A&R is just issuing its permits, so they're not any protection against development. Please, please revise these sections. This is not going to be helpful in the long run to doing what I believe that this subcommittee membership wants to do. My other comments have to do with the discussion about enhanced energy planning. I've been giving presentations to towns about this. David, if you want some insight, I'd be happy to talk to you about it, but you also might want to consult with Ann Margolis, because at the department, they've reached out to me about my recommendations for how to improve the standards the Department of Public Services put in place, because I've reviewed tons of the enhanced energy plans that towns have put together. They're completely useless to the Public Utility Commission. It's extremely hard to write a plan that the Public Utility Commission finds useful. They have requirements for very specific standards. They have to be specific to the site. For a town to do it, you pretty much have to go through your whole town and mention every road and every ridge line and say yes or no. And it's for volunteer planners, it's a nearly impossible thing. Inventorying by the regional planning commissions is not being done. Most of the town plans do not have preferred sites noted. So it's an extremely challenging topic. I understand the desire to use planning, but the planners have no real understanding of what to do, because it needs to be done in conjunction with the utilities, because it's all about where the grid can handle it, and it's just not happening. And so I think that there is a way to improve the process, and I've shared my ideas with the Department of Public Service at their request. They have copies of all my presentations. I'd be glad to share them with you, but this language that you put in here is not what needs to be in here. And then my other comment is that because energy development, including solar and wind and biomass, except I'm not sure what pellets I think go through Act 250, but I couldn't find the application for the one in Clarendon. But everything else goes through the Public Utility Commission, and you have no reference at all to the Public Utility Commission. There are very severe equity issues at the PUC where to do a case, you can expect maybe to spend $20,000 to $50,000 to $100,000, depending on the type of the case, where the developer is going to make all the money. So I think that there needs to be something added, and I'm really sorry to say this. I mean, I'm kind of liking, I think it was John who said, let's just boycott it and not put something in. I mean, I really appreciate all the good work you're all doing. I know it's just been a long haul and all that, and I hate to offer criticism at this point, but it's deficient in its talking about land use as specific to renewable energy development and the regulatory process at the Public Utility Commission. And when I've raised this at other subcommittees, they've said it's an ecosystem that's dealing with this. So somehow you got to get Section 248 in here. You got to get the PUC in here. You might recommend that there be a requirement for a stakeholder process for projects over a certain size. It's just, as it exists now, I work with people who, when they're done, never want to talk about the PUC again. They say it's brutal, and I keep helping people participate. And it is just something that at some point it's a nut somebody's got to crack, because the system we have is awful. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Okay, thanks, everybody. I think, oh, Cheryl, I'm sorry. I thought you had spoke already. Feel free to take a minute or two to share your comments.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I think Annette just shared my comments. I just really did want to say that I don't need to talk much about it, but I've alluded to many of the, well, spoken right out on many of the things that she said with regard to local municipalities. And she was really very thorough. So I really want to add my thought, my endorsement to what she said. Yeah, I agree that with Jamie as well. It's a great idea to add tracking land use in, but I think we have this, as Zach said, we really do have data about land use and parcelization, et cetera. And so we don't need that. It's good to make sure that we're doing what we need to do, but that has been done already also. And so we need really hard line recommendations to make that stop. Let's see. Yeah, I guess that's it. I did talk earlier. There are some other things I would add previously, but that's okay. I think also Bill Keaton is now not in favor of biomass, just to add that in. I've read a few things that he's written fairly recently, very recently, speaking against using biomass in general. I knew you would have something to say about that, Charlie. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's nuanced, right? There's an article he wrote, which is great, called something about you can't have your biomass cake and eat it too. And I think it's more nuanced than that. I think he's opposed to certain kind of applications, but I don't think it's appropriate to say broad scale, not in favor of it. Thanks.
Thanks. Facts matter. Okay, thanks, everybody. We're going to close our meeting for today. See y'all soon.
Thanks, everyone.